Chapter 351, Part 1. We meet again. Thor. Chen Luo nodded slightly and smiled. Are you the strong human being that Phil Coulson mentioned? Thor was stunned at first, but then quickly realized, but it's useless. Without the strength of a demigod, there is no way to resist the destroyer. It's better for me to go. Let me have a talk with Loki. Loki? Phil Coulson's eyes widened with confusion on his face. Isn't he your brother? Why would he want to deal with you? Perhaps you are worried that Thor will compete with him for the throne? Chen Luo shrugged and said with a smile. Fighting for the throne? Isn't Thor already immortal now? How could? Thor didn't speak, but his eyes dimmed slightly. He turned his head and looked at the tall figure in front of him. Then a trace of determination appeared on his face. He said no more and strode forward. Thor. When 093 saw Thor's actions, Phil Coulson's expression changed, and he was about to go out and stop him. However, at this moment, Chen Luo stretched out his hand to stop him. Looking at Thor's leaving figure, he said calmly, let him give it a try. This time, maybe it will be an opportunity for him to become Thor again. After a pause, Chen Luo showed a relaxed smile and said, and don't forget, I'm already here now. As long as I'm here, Thor will be fine. Hearing this, Phil Coulson paused in his steps and couldn't help but relax a little. After several previous cooperation experiences, Phil Coulson also has deep trust in Chen Luo's strength, so he has no doubts about Chen Luo's words. Watching Thor's leaving figure, Phil Coulson seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Chen Luo curiously and asked, by the way, Chen, what happened to the powerful demigod that Thor mentioned just now? Have you reached this level now? You should have an idea of what he meant by demigods. Chen Luo nodded and said, back then, Apocalypse was a demigod. So, you should understand, right? Apocalypse? Phil Coulson was startled, and his eyes suddenly became more solemn as he looked at the destroyer in front of him. So, if this big guy uses all his strength, wouldn't he be able to destroy all humans? You can say that. Hearing Chen Luo's answer, Phil Coulson took a deep breath and looked at Chen Luo involuntarily, feeling a sense of security in his heart for no reason. There is no doubt that there are previous cases of defeating Apocalypse. In Phil Coulson's opinion, Chen Luo's strength has definitely reached the demigod level, and the most important thing is that such a strong man is still on their side, which is undoubtedly more. It reassured them a lot. At the same time, now that Chen Luo is here, Phil Coulson is not as nervous about the destroyer in front of him as he was at first. Instead, he looks forward curiously, wanting to see what Thor plans to do. On the other side, Thor strode forward. Seeing Thor's arrival, the expressions of the 4 Asgard members who were already scarred all changed. Sif quickly came to Thor's side and said anxiously, Thor, what are you doing here? Loki's target is probably you. If you go like this now, you will probably die in the hands of the destroyer. Let me go. Sif. Thor turned to look at her, his face more serious than ever. Loki's target is me. If I don't get past, the destroyer will not stop moving forward. With his strength, if you continue to resist, how many levels can you hold on to? And it's not just you, but everyone in the town. I can't watch them being buried with me. If Loki wants to kill me, just use my life in exchange. You should leave first. Don't take action again. Leave the rest to me. As he spoke, an inexplicable momentum emerged from Thor. Even though he was still immortal, the courage he displayed at this moment was so heartbreaking. Seeing the expression on Thor's face at this moment, Sif was shocked. She said no more, nodded variously, and then called for others to retreat. Thor. Volstag's expression changed, and he wanted to say something, but before he could speak, Hogan grabbed his body and dragged his already seriously injured body slowly backwards. Retreat. Watching several people leave one after another, the destroyer at this moment was very strange and did not stop him. He stood quietly in place, as if waiting for something. Thor strode to the other party, raised his head, looked at the tall figure in front of him, and said in a deep voice, Loki, come out. I know you can hear me. As Thor's words fell, the next moment, the mask on the destroyer's face slowly opened and closed, and then, a familiar voice slowly sounded from the destroyer's body. Brother, we haven't seen each other for a while, right? Loki, why? Hearing Loki's voice, Thor's face changed slightly. A trace of sadness flashed in his eyes, and his voice became deeper. Why did you do this? No matter what I did to make you like this, I'm really sorry. But these people are innocent. Killing them will not do you any good. So if your target is me, then come and kill me. And let it end there. As soon as the words fell, the scene suddenly fell into silence. After a while, Rongji's voice sounded again. Brother, this is the last time I call you this. You and I are from 2 different worlds after all. Now I finally understand why my father never thought of passing the throne to me. In his eyes, I am just a tool in his hands. Loki's tone became deeper and deeper. Far away in Asgard's palace, on the throne, an angry look appeared on Loki's face, and his face looked even more ferocious. Thor, actually, I am just the one my father picked up from Jotunheim. From the beginning to the end, he never treated me as his biological son. How could it be possible? Upon hearing this, Thor was stunned, his face full of disbelief. That's right. That's it. If it weren't for this, why would my father still have hope for you after you committed such a serious crime, expecting you to truly grow up and take over his throne? From the beginning to the end, he never thought of handing over the throne to me. 2.2 Loki. Thor's heart tightened, and he said seriously, "Listen, no matter whether you are my father's biological child or not, in my eyes, you will always be my brother. If you want the throne, I won't fight with you." However, before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Loki's voice. "Thor, I will prove to my father that I am the most suitable candidate for the throne. But before that, I will never allow you to threaten my throne." "So sorry." As soon as he finished speaking, under the shocked gazes of the Sif people behind Thor, the destroyer punched out. Huge amounts of power instantly crashed into Thor's body, and his body flew backwards for more than 10 meters, and then hit him hard. Ground. Farewell. Looking at the figure lying on the ground not far away, gradually disappearing, the destroyer slowly turned around and walked towards the distance. Chapter 352, Part 1. Thor. Looking at the figure who fell to the ground and gradually disappeared, a look of panic flashed across Sif's face. However, before she could make a move, a scream sounded from behind Chen Luo and others, and then Jian stumbled. Staggering past Chen Luo and others, he came to Thor. "Thor, what's wrong with you?" Seeing the wounds on Thor's body that were constantly flowing with blood, Jane's eyes instantly turned red, and she stretched out her hands tremblingly to hold him in her arms. "Jane." Thor coughed up blood and slowly raised the corner of his mouth. "It's okay. You all are safe." "Thor, no, don't do this. Don't leave me." Tears kept falling from the corners of Jane's eyes, and her heart was filled with palpitations. "Chun." Thor Seeing this scene in front of him, Phil Coulson's expression changed, and he couldn't help but look in the direction of Chen Luo. "Don't worry." Chen Luo's expression remained unchanged. He looked at the tall figure heading towards him and said calmly, "Thor will be fine. Next, you just have to wait for him to wake up again." If he was still a little unsure, after seeing Thor's performance just now, Chen Luo was convinced that Thor's changes at age 18 were enough to gain Mjolnir's approval again. If his guess is correct, that Thor will come back to the world soon. After making some guesses in my mind, half of the task regarding the system has been completed, and it is the only thing left. Thinking of this, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with light. He stopped hesitating, and immediately took steps. As soon as his feet moved, Chen Luo disappeared instantly. When he appeared again, he was already in front of the tall figure. "Loki." The destroyer paused and lowered his head to see Chen Luo's figure. The next moment, the sound of the roadbed sounded. "Your Excellency Chen Luo, do you want to stop me too? I guess I didn't provoke you." "Really?" Chen Luo smiled slightly, with an inexplicable expression on his face. "Then I would like to ask you, what would you think if I went to Asgard to cause havoc? You probably don't understand that the Earth is my territory. No one else is allowed to destroy it at will." "Loki, you've crossed a line." As Chen Luo finished speaking, Loki was silent for a moment, and then a sneer sounded. "I see. In that case, what are you planning to do?" "How to do it?" The corner of Chen Luo's mouth slowly raised a slight arc, and a powerful aura continued to emerge from his body and gradually spread to the surroundings. As Chen Luo's aura spread, the sky above everyone's heads was unknowingly shrouded by a large cloud. After carefully observing the cloud, one could faintly see a hint of blood in it. Feeling the powerful aura emanating from Chen Luo, the expressions of the Sif people not far away instantly changed, and their hearts were shaken. "I think your weapon is pretty good. Otherwise, just keep it as my collection." "Oh, it seems you want the destroyer? Interesting." Loki's voice rang out from the destroyer, loud and loud, resounding throughout the sky. "Then come and try. If you can do it." Now, I will show you the true power of the Destroyer. As Loki's voice gradually faded away as he spoke, the mask on the Destroyer's head quickly opened, and red light shone in his body, then poured into his head. When the light on the head gathered to the extreme, the next moment, with a deafening bang, a thick red laser shot out from the mask and blasted in the direction of Chen Luo. Facing the attack of the Destroyer, Chen Luo remained motionless. A layer of blood appeared and flowed faintly on his body. The blood god power in his body formed a barrier, tightly wrapping Chen Luo inside. The crimson laser collided directly with Chen Luo. Facing the blow of this artifact, although its energy conversion ability could not work due to the divine power contained in it, it was blocked by the barrier formed by the blood god power, still keeping it firmly out. Is that all? Looking forward, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with a sharp light, and he said word by word, "If it's only to this extent, I will accept this weapon." As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Luo thought and disappeared instantly. When Chen Luo reappeared, he was already behind the Destroyer. The blood-colored divine power surged out of his body and turned into a huge amount of blood-colored sickle. He held the handle of the knife with one hand and slashed hard towards the opponent's neck. Boom! There was a sharp sound of metal friction, and the rich blood exploded into countless fragments and then dissipated in the air. Looking at the bloody sickle with only the hilt left in his hand, and then looking at the unscathed appearance of the opponent's neck, Chen Luo frowned. At the same time, he kept moving his hands. Divine power surged, and the sickle instantly condensed again. Then the blade quickly began to extend and spread, and finally, before the mask was closed, the blade instantly sank into the mask. When the bloody sickle collided with the red laser surging in the mask, the two different divine powers collided, dissipated, and then became stalemate. As for the Destroyer, an artifact forged by Odin himself, even if it is now controlled by Loki, its power is completely irresistible to Chen Luo, who has just become a demigod. But because he successfully killed a 297 demigod in Jotunheim and used the method informed by the system to devour the demigod, his blood god power was further enhanced. It is precisely because of this that after his strength was further enhanced, only by doing this can we survive with this artifact. But this alone is undoubtedly not enough. If you want to defeat this war weapon, you must find another way. After a moment of stalemate, Chen Luo frowned as he felt the red laser continuously emerging from the Destroyer's body and seeing no sign of fading away. Then a light flashed in his eyes. With a thought, the blood-colored sickle in his hand quickly began to change, and then formed a blood-colored round shield. Two long blood-colored handles extended from both sides of the round shield, and Chen Luo held it in his hand. The round shield covered the Destroyer's head, blocking the red laser fired by it, and then pulled it back hard, bringing the laser with it and firmly fitting it with the Destroyer's head. Boom! Huge amounts of roaring sounds sounded, and as the laser was tightly covered by Chen Luo's mask, not letting it escape at all, a succession of constant explosions came from the Destroyer's body, and even the metal on the body surface bulged slightly, black smoke rose from everywhere, and violent metal friction sounded. When the red light in the body slowly extinguished and dissipated, a loud noise came from the Destroyer's body, and then fell into silence for an instant. Seeing this, Chen Luo slowly stopped what he was doing. Chapter 353, Part 1. The bloody divine power immediately dissipated. Chen Luo jumped off the opponent and came to him. Looking at the tall figure in front of him, his face was extremely calm. What? So that's all you can do? Loki? If this is the case, then I will accept this artifact. After saying that, Chen Luo reached forward. However, the next moment, a sudden change occurred. The dazzling red light shines from the Destroyer's body again, and with the emergence of this light, the Destroyer seems to have life again, awakening from sleep again, and regaining its original power. Boom! There was a sound of metal friction, and he quickly raised his arm. The arm, which was entirely made of ulu metal, seemed to turn into a sledgehammer, and it hit Chen Luo's head heavily. The terrifying power exploded suddenly, and the air in front of him seemed to be exploded instantly, making a deafening roar. Where the fist came into contact with the air, white air waves continued to generate, and then spread to the surroundings, causing waves of strong waves. Strong wind. At the same time, on the surface of this metal fist, a layer of faint red light shrouded it. Although it looked inconspicuous, Chen Luo still felt a devastating and terrifying destructive power from it. With a cold light flashing in his eyes, Chen Luo had no intention of dodge. His lustful power wrapped around the surface of his fist, and his muscles tensed up. He faced the front and punched out without any hesitation. The two fists, one big and one small, collided together in an instant. The next moment, the two colors of light, golden red and blood, instantly enveloped the two people. Like two substantial suns, the violent light bloomed outwards, instantly covering the entire body. A small town is covered. Under these two intense rays of light, an unprecedentedly powerful hurricane burst out, with the two people at the center, blowing wildly outwards. Under this strong wind, the vehicles parked on the surrounding streets were also blown back several meters. Their bodies shook violently, and they seemed to be blown away. Seeing this scene, the faces of Phil Coulson and others behind him changed drastically. Without thinking, they quickly dragged Thor and rushed into a nearby house to hide. The strong airflow continued to blow around. Finally, the vehicles around Chen Luo and the two could no longer hold on. They were blown high into the sky by the strong wind and flew backwards for hundreds of meters. Then it fell towards the ground. Bang, bang, bang. At the moment of landing, violent explosions sounded, and the car body was instantly enveloped in flames, forming huge amounts of fireballs. The flames spread everywhere, and some vehicles hit nearby houses. Under the strong wind, the flames directly destroyed the entire house was enveloped and swallowed up, and finally formed into a ball of fire that was even bigger than the previous one, burning blazingly in the air. In just a short moment, less than half of the town was enveloped in flames and turned into a sea of fire. Fortunately, most of the people in the town had already evacuated during the destruction of the destroyer. Otherwise, most people would have no hope of surviving in the face of this scene. As the flames burned, the air temperature continued to rise, and the fire gradually spread to all directions under the strong wind. Because in this small town, most of the houses are made of wooden structures. When faced with the invasion of flames, they are often instantaneous. As time goes by, the fire intensity will become larger and larger. If this continues if you go down, I'm afraid that the whole town will be turned into a sea of fire before long. Humph! At the center of the light, Chen Luo's cold snort came, and then, along with a dull loud noise, a blood-colored giant fist that looked like it was poured with blood and was hundreds of meters in size exploded, and he punched out. The violent force instantly acted on the destroyer, sending him flying backwards and turning into a meteor, flying towards the outside of the town. The light gradually dissipated, revealing Chen Luo's body stick in the center of the field. In the previous battle, because the strength of the two men was too great, a huge pit with a radius of tens of meters appeared on the ground centered on Chen Luo. Countless cracks spread crazily outward, and the ground began to collapse. Houses on both sides also collapsed and turned into countless fragments. Coupled with the huge fireballs that appeared from time to time, the place looked even more tragic. Ignoring the scenes around him, Chen Luo kept staring at the figure in the sky, fighting spirit rising in his heart. With a thought in his mind, the next moment, Chen Luo disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was already above the destroyer flying in the sky. Raising his right fist high, the surface of the fist was wrapped in a layer of bloody divine power, and then slammed down. Boom! Under Chen Luo's huge force, which has now reached thousands of tons, the destroyer's upside-down flight was stopped violently, and then the whole person fell from the altitude to the ground in an instant. Accompanied by a loud noise, the next moment, the ground was instantly shrouded in a cloud of smoke and dust, making it completely unclear what was happening inside. Chen Luo frowned slightly, then took a deep breath. His chest bulged high, and then spit it out fiercely. With Chen Luo's current terrifying physique, even if he exhales at will, he has terrifying power comparable to nature. A strong airflow blew out, and then turned into a strong wind, blowing away the smoke and dust below, revealing the scene inside. I saw that under Chen Luo's punch, a huge amount of deep pit was blasted out of the ground again, as if it had been hit by a meteorite. The overall shape was hemispherical, and the depth was tens of meters. If an ordinary person walked from the edge jumped down, I'm afraid that as soon as you hit the ground, your body will be smashed into a puddle of meat. However, such a height is still unable to cause any substantial damage to the destroyer. As a rare material for forging artifacts in Asgard, URU metal is as hard as original adamantium or vibranium. It is not that simple to destroy it. The destroyer's body is forged from this metal, and coupled with the blessing of Asgard's runes, in addition to giving it a terrifying defense, it also gives it a powerful recovery ability. It can be said that as long as it is not destroyed completely, destroy and decompose, with the resilience of destruction, sooner or later it can be restored to the original state. The indestructible body, coupled with the use of a fixed star in the body as an energy source, makes this artifact even more terrifying in combat effectiveness. Even if it cannot exert its full power due to the operator, in Chen Luo's opinion, it has already extremely tricky. In order to completely defeat it, in Chen Luo's opinion, one must either have the ability like Magneto, Wang Nuo's, to be able to forcibly decompose metal, or else one needs a weapon whose texture is not weaker than the former to forcibly take it apart. There is no other way. What a coincidence. There is such a weapon in the center of a base not far from Chen Luo. If he could master Mjolnir, given the quality of this artifact, he would be able to achieve his goal. But it's a pity that even he can't lift this artifact. Looking towards the base not far away, Chen Luo frowned slightly and felt a little troubled. However, At this moment, Chen Luo's expression changed, and he suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. At this moment, in the sky above his head, among the dark clouds, suddenly, a bolt of lightning suddenly descended from the sky and fell straight into the center of the base. Boom! There was a loud noise, and then Mjolnir rushed out of the base in an instant, and then flew to somewhere behind Chen Luo. Chapter 354, Part 1. Seeing this scene, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, as if he thought of something. His eyes suddenly lit up. Subconsciously, he turned his head and looked back. He didn't let him wait long, and then a huge amount of thunder sounded, resounding throughout the sky. In the dark clouds that stretched for hundreds of miles in the sky, at some point, countless electric arcs suddenly emerged in the clouds, like countless snakes, constantly swimming in the clouds. The sky suddenly became daylight, with a dazzling white light, and then, a file-sized thunder and lightning as thick as an adult's waist suddenly fell from the clouds, instantly enveloping somewhere below. Even though he was thousands of meters away, Chen Luo could clearly feel the divine power in the distance that was constantly reviving at a speed visible to the naked eye, as well as the unique aura that only the demigods of Song Dynasty could possess. The dazzling electric light exploded, and in the small town in the distance, a dazzling light emerged, and then a figure instantly shot straight into the sky, heading straight towards the clouds in the sky. Boom! Thunder and lightning fell, wrapping the figure in the sky. When the thunder gradually dissipated, Chen Luo could clearly see that 167 Thor in the distance had woken up again without knowing it, and he was covered with a layer of armor. The bright red cloak behind his back was swinging in the wind, holding the Mjolnir originally stored in the base in his hand, and the thunder light surging all over his body was like a god. Thor is officially back. Wielding the short hammer in his hand, Thor flew quickly towards Chen Luo, led by Mjolnir. In just a few seconds, he was already in front of Chen Luo. Thor. Seeing the person coming, Chen Luo raised the corner of his mouth slightly and said, "It seems you have finally recovered. Sorry for the waiting." Thor nodded, then looked downwards and moved his eyes towards the deep pit. Then, "Leave it to me." Looking at the Mjolnir in his hand, Chen Luo nodded in disbelief, smiled and said, "Since you are willing to take over and deal with this trouble, then I'll leave it to you. But if you need help with anything, just ask." "Don't worry." Thor smiled confidently. Lightning flashed in his eyes. "I am enough." Biff, after saying that, Thor slammed the short hammer in his hand downwards, and his whole body fell downwards at the same time. Boom. Before the destroyer could crawl out of the pit, Mjolnir suddenly fell and hit it in the chest. With a dull loud noise, the destroyer instantly stepped back several steps under the huge amounts of power, and then finally stood firm. "Thor." Loki's voice suddenly sounded from the destroyer, full of unconcealable anger. "Loki." Thor fell to the ground with a crash, raised the short hammer that fell to the ground again, looked at the destroyer in front of him. A trace of complexity flashed in his eyes. "Admit defeat, Loki. You are no match for me." "Not always." Loki snorted coldly, said nothing, and immediately activated the destroyer again and launched an attack on it. Chen Luo stood quietly in the sky without saying a word, watching the battle between the two men below. I have to say that Thor is no less than Thor. Even if he has just regained his divine power, his strength has reached a considerable level among demigods. Although there is still some gap between him and his current self, this gap is also visible to the naked eye, within the range. But with such strength alone, even with the blessing of the artifact Mjolnir, it is not easy to defeat the destroyer. After all, the destroyer is an extremely special artifact forged by Odin. It can not only be worn as a battle armor, but can also fight independently as it is now. Such an ability is something Mjolnir has never had. In addition, there is an entire fixed star core in its body as power, which also gives it a constant source of power to support it in fighting, and its endurance is far better than Thor's. Therefore, after a while, with the gradual consumption of physical and divine power, Thor, who had been able to barely maintain a stalemate with him, became faintly invincible, with faint sweat on his forehead and a sense of strength on his face. "Chun, come and help. I can't hold on any longer." As soon as he finished speaking, the next moment, Chen Luo's figure suddenly appeared from behind the destroyer. He raised the bloody sickle that had already condensed in his hand and slashed hard at the opponent's neck. Clang! There was a huge and crisp sound, and the sickle instantly hooked the opponent's neck, and then Chen Luo used his arm to drag him backwards. With Chen Luo's help, the destroyer's movement stopped instantly. Seeing this scene, Thor was relieved. Thunder surged in his eyes, and when he saw the destroyer being restrained at the moment, Thor moved his feet and rushed forward in an instant. Swinging the short hammer in his hand, thunder and lightning wrapped around the surface of the hammer. Bursts of thunder, accompanied by huge amounts of thunder, smashed towards the opponent's front door. Boom! Under Thor's heavy hammer, countless terrifying lightnings rushed toward the opponent's body along its open mask. Even though the destroyer tried hard to close the mask, what Thor was holding at the moment was Mjolnir, which was also made of URU metal. It was no less hard than the other one. So Mjolnir remained motionless and was firmly stuck in the mask. Minister. List. New. Chen Luo reacted instantly, and the blood god power turned into countless tiny threads and penetrated through the destroyer's mask. The blood god power and Thor's divine power poured into the mask. The combination of the two suddenly erupted with an unimaginable terrifying power, like dozens of atomic bombs exploding in unison, exploding in the destroyer's body. In such a terrifying explosion, the destroyer's whole body shook violently, the red light in his body quickly extinguished, and black smoke began to emit from his body. Then, his body instantly froze and stood still on the spot, and fell heavily backwards. Boom. A dull crash sounded. Looking at the figure of the destroyer lying on the ground, the two waited for a moment and finally breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that the other party still showed no sign of getting up. Finally solved. Thor breathed out softly, his face looking more relaxed than ever. Chen Luo turned his head, looked at Thor, and said teasingly, "Why? Who said just now that you can do it yourself?" Hearing this, Thor couldn't help but feel a trace of embarrassment on his face. He opened his mouth and was about to say something to save face. However, at the next moment, a bright light flashed and enveloped Chen Luo in an instant. Chapter 355, Part 1. That's Bifrost. In a small town thousands of meters away, Sif and his group, who had just rushed out of the house, subconsciously looked up at the sky. Seeing the brilliant beam of light that suddenly appeared in the sky, their faces changed. They looked at each other and didn't know what to think of. At this moment, a bad premonition surged through their hearts. Bifrost? Phil Coulson on the side was stunned for a moment, then reacted immediately and couldn't help but ask, "Has someone from Asgard come here again? Who could this person be?" "Not sure." Sif shook his head, and there was a hint of worry in his eyes as he looked into the distance. He thought for a while, and finally turned solemn and said, "I want to go over and take a look." "No." At this time, Fandral on the side suddenly spoke to stop him. "Sif, in the current battle over there, our strength is beyond our control. 477, believe Thor. Now that he has recovered, with his strength, no matter who the opponent is, he can solve it. Don't worry. Even if Thor can't handle it, Mr. Chen Luo is still there. With him here, I believe nothing can't be solved." Phil Coulson on the side also spoke quickly. "Chen Luo?" Vostag on the side had a hint of doubt on his face. "Are you sure he can do it?" "Mortal, I think you don't understand the power of the destroyer at all. It is not a force that a mortal can contend with." Hearing the doubts from the other party, Phil Coulson frowned, calmed down his dissatisfaction, and said calmly, "Really? Do you think Mr. Chen Luo is just a mortal? If that's the case, who just took action to repel the destroyer you were talking about?" As he spoke, Phil Coulson looked at the four of them, his face more serious than ever. "I may not know what the demigods you call are, but in my opinion, Mr. Chen Luo's strength is no worse than that of demigods. Otherwise, the inner demons would not be in the hands of Mr. Chen Luo." Fall. As soon as these words came out, Sif and the others changed their expressions again. "Which heart demon? Are you talking about the king of hell, the son of Mephisto? He is actually dead. How is this possible? If you don't believe it, you can sell it yourself." Seeing Phil Coulson's confident look, several people suddenly believed his words. Thinking back to Chen Luo's performance just now, Vostag, who was still a little skeptical at first, was speechless. If Phil Coulson is right, then Chen Luo's strength is very likely to be at the demigod level. Although they have not dealt with the witch heart demon before, as the descendant of Mephisto, the Lord of Hell, the witch heart demon, they have also heard of his name. According to the information they know, as a descendant of a god, the strength of the witch heart demon has definitely reached the level of a demigod. So if such beings fall in the hands of Chen Luo, then one can imagine Chen Luo's strength. Although they already vaguely believed Phil Coulson's statement, the thought that the mortals they despised at the beginning could have such strength still made them, who had always been proud of the Acer clan, feel a little unbelievable, as if they didn't dare. I believe that a strong man of this level can be born on Earth. But no matter what they thought, after realizing that Chen Luo's strength far exceeded them, their views on Chen Luo had unknowingly changed. Definitely, Chen Luo has no way of knowing all this. On the other side, when the light emitted by Bifrost slowly dissipated, a slender figure also appeared in front of Chen Luo and Chen Luo. Chen Luo frowned slightly when he saw the person coming. Before he could say anything, Thor suddenly became happy and shouted loudly, "Thor, we meet again." Looking at Thor in front of him calmly, Lu Ji said calmly, "Loki, admit defeat." Thor couldn't help but said, "Now that the destroyer has been defeated by us, you have no chance of winning. It's too late for you to stop now. As for my father, I will tell him, and he will forgive you. Whether you are a giant of Jotunheim or not, I will always regard you as my biological brother." Looking at Thor's serious look, Loki's eyes flashed with complexity, but he soon regained his composure. "No need to tell me so much, Thor. I will prove to him that I am the most suitable candidate to inherit the throne. Let's duel head-on. Thor, we will eventually decide the winner. The final winner between us will be the new king of Asgard in the future." Having said that, Loki flipped his palm, and the casket of ancient winters instantly appeared in his hand. The energy of ice overflowed, and the surrounding ground was instantly covered with thick frost even if he had not actively moved it. "Loki, do you really want to do this?" Looking at Loki's actions, Thor's face became even more anxious, and he wanted to persuade him to say something. But before he could say anything, he was instantly interrupted by Loki. "Stop talking nonsense. Come on. I want everyone to know that I am the new king of Asgard." After saying that, divine power surged in Loki's hand and instantly poured into the casket of ancient winters in his hand. With the influx of Loki's divine power, the next moment, Loki's originally fair skin instantly turned to dark blue. Strange lines appeared on the surface of his body, and his brown pupils instantly turned red, and at the same time, a cold breath continued to flow from his body, emerge and spread around. Under the influence of casket of ancient winters, the roadbed finally returned to its original appearance. Looking at the appearance in front of him that was no different from the giants of Jotunheim, Thor's eyes were filled with surprise. However, what surprised him even more was that after possessing the artifact casket of ancient winters, Loki's aura was unprecedentedly high at this moment. In the end, it grew to the point where even he felt vaguely threatened. After feeling Loki's aura, even Thor couldn't help but tremble in his heart. He vaguely understood in his heart that Loki now has the strength to threaten him. Thinking of this, Thor immediately tightened his muscles and clenched the Mjolnir in his hand, ready at any time. However, just as he was getting ready, on the other side, Chen Luo, who was completely ignored, finally couldn't hold back anymore, moved his feet, and disappeared in an instant. "Hey, Loki, did you forget something?" As Chen Luo's words sounded, Lu Ji was suddenly shocked. Just now, his attention was focused on Thor, and he wanted to rely on his new artifact to defeat the opponent head-on. Only in this way can he prove that he is the only new 1.6 king of Asgard in the future. Precisely because most of his attention was on Thor, he lost attention to Chen Luo beside him. Definitely, Chen Luo didn't care that much about Loki's ignorance, but after just finishing the destroyer, he now had no intention of watching the duel between the two brothers. After all, the relationship between the two, no matter what the fight was now, no matter how fierce the fight is, they will all be reconciled in the end. Instead of watching the two brothers continue to engage in a showdown, it would be better for him to take action himself and settle this farce first. Fall down. In this thought, Chen Luo took advantage of Loki's attention being focused on Thor at the moment, and chose a sneak attack without any sense of martial ethics. Appearing behind him instantly, a heavy hand knife wrapped in divine power slashed down. After receiving this heavy blow, Loki's eyes instantly turned white, his body went limp, and then he fainted to the ground. Chapter 356, Part 1. Nailed it. Looking at Loki, who was lying on the ground now, unable to resist anymore, Chen Luo said softly. Turning his head and looking at Thor, who was now stunned, Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and said, "Why are you still standing there? Do you just want your dear brother to lie here all the time?" As soon as these words came out, Thor suddenly woke up from his daze, raised his head and looked at Chen Luo. "Chen, what are you?" "What?" Chen Luo rolled his eyes and asked, "Are you really planning to fight with your brother? This result is already the best, isn't it?" Thor was stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted, nodded slightly, and said with emotion, "You are right. This result is already the best." After Loki was knocked unconscious by Chen Luo, the battle between the brothers came to an end. After lifting up the unconscious Loki and putting it on his shoulders, Thor immediately planned to go back and join Sif and the others, and then return to Asgard. But just when Thor was about to leave, Chen Luo glanced at 18 and thought, and said, "Thor, I need to discuss something with you." "Huh? What's the matter?" Chen Luo pointed to the tall metal body at his feet. "This big guy should be scrapped now. If you don't mind, leave this to me. What do you think?" Looking in the direction pointed by Chen Luo, Thor's heart moved and he said, "You want the destroyer?" After thinking about it, Thor nodded cheerfully and then said, "Definitely no problem." After the destroyer was beaten to pieces by him and Chen Luo, this weapon has now lost its original power. If you want to make it work again, you can only put a fixed star core into it again. Reproduce the full power of this artifact once again. But if you want to do this, it is obviously impossible to do it with Thor's current strength. Even Odin, who is now greatly damaged, is still very weak. Unless Odin at his peak takes action himself, it is possible to repair it. But this is obviously no longer possible. Therefore, Thor did not feel that it was a pity for this former artifact. In addition, Chen Luo's help just now also aroused Thor's favor and trust, and he vaguely regarded it as a comrade in arms and companion. But for himself, Thor has always been very generous. Then I won't be polite to you. Hearing Thor's answer, Chen Luo smiled and nodded, then came to the destroyer's side, lifted it up with one hand, then turned around and said, "Now that everything here has been settled, let's part ways here. Let's meet again when we have a chance in the future." Thor nodded heavily, with a hearty smile on his face. "Then it's settled. I'll take Loki back to Asgard first. After the things there are settled, I'll come to Earth to have a drink with you." In this regard, Chen Luo definitely had no reason to refuse and agreed immediately. Then, under Chen Luo's gaze, Thor swung Mjolnir in his hand. Driven by the short hammer, his body instantly shot straight into the sky and disappeared from Chen Luo's sight. Watching Thor's retreating figure, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with light. He glanced at the destroyer in his hand, said nothing, thought in his mind, and then disappeared in an instant. A few hours later, when Chen Luo returned home again, he had already placed the destroyer somewhere for separate custody. Chen Luo also had his own ideas as to why he wanted this artifact that was completely scrapped. After seeing the amazing fighting power of Thor and Loki after possessing the artifact, Chen Luo also realized the importance of a suitable weapon. Therefore, at this moment, he couldn't help but have the idea of creating an artifact of his own. If you want to successfully make an artifact of your own, the corresponding materials are also essential, and it just so happens that the URU metal in the destroyer's body meets such conditions. Definitely, in addition to the materials for making the artifact, you also need a forger who has the ability to forge the artifact. Only with the help of the other party can you finally complete the weapon that Chen Luo wants. As for this caster, Chen Luo has already had an idea. Chen Luo, who is familiar with the plot, knows very well that after Thor's Mjolnir was crushed by his ruthless sister, in order to find the power to rival Thanos, Thor finally went to the dwarf planet to seek help from the dwarf clan, and it forged a brand new artifact, the Storm Axe. It is with this newly forged artifact that Thor can grow into a top combat force that can compete with Thanos head-on. The dwarf family has played a very important role in this. Therefore, if he wants to create a powerful artifact, the help of the dwarf family must be indispensable. As for what kind of weapon should be forged, Chen Luo also had a vague idea in his mind. But that's all in the future. Now Chen Luo has another thing to deal with. Ding! It is detected that the host has completed the selection, and the reward is now distributed. The directional portal has been issued. At the moment when the destroyer fell, and as the system's voice fell, Chen Luo clearly felt that something appeared in his mind out of thin air. As soon as his mind moved, the next moment, a completely illusory portal that only he could see appeared in front of him. In the previous communication with the system, Chen Luo already understood the usage of this portal. Silently thinking about the place he wanted to reach, Chen Luo came to the door in front of him, stretched out his right hand, gently moved forward, and pushed the door open. Stepping forward, the moment Chen Luo stepped into the door disappeared. In the ice and snow, Chen Luo appeared quietly. He raised his head and looked at the dark clouds above his head, 793, and the endless snow-capped mountains around him. Chen Luo instantly understood that he was now in Jotunheim. After looking around and not seeing the familiar palace, Chen Luo's eyes flashed slightly, and he made a vague judgment in his heart. With a thought in his mind, Chen Luo used teleportation and began to patrol the area. A moment later, after circling the entire planet, Chen Luo finally discovered that this place was 1,000,000 miles away from Lauf's palace, and not only that, there were not even giants of Jotunheim here. Events, as a portal location is simply perfect. Finding a hidden corner, Chen Luo built the portal in place without hesitation. Under the command of his thoughts, an illusory portal appeared in the next moment, and then slowly dissipated into the air pressure. After determining the location, this portal has been transformed into a coordinate leading to Jotunheim. In the future, as long as Chen Luo makes a thought, he can be teleported here from the Earth instantly, which is extremely convenient. At the moment the portal is confirmed, the location of the teleportation to Jotunheim cannot be changed, but the Earth as the starting point has no location restrictions. No matter where in the Earth you are, as long as Chen Luo is willing, he can open the portal to Jotunheim. Jotunheim's portal. After setting up the portal, Chen Luo was not in a hurry to leave, but started his next move. Chapter 357, Part 1. It's millions of miles away from Lauf's palace. On the top of a huge snow mountain thousands of feet high, a giant of Jotunheim, about 3 meters tall, with dark blue skin and strange lines all over its body, sat cross-legged, eyes closed, and stood quietly in place. As one of the few demigod-level experts in the Giants of Jotunheim clan, Lori also alone occupies one of the few peaks in Jotunheim for his training. You must know that among the countless snow mountains in Jotunheim, as the height of the snow mountains increases, the power of ice and snow contained in them becomes more and more intense. And this power of ice and snow is also of considerable benefit to the growth of the Giants of Jotunheim clan. especially the snow mountain occupied by Lori, which is also among the top 5 in Jotunheim. It is even more beneficial to the giants of Jotunheim clan. It goes without saying. If a newborn baby of the giants of Jotunheim family were allowed to grow here, it would only take less than 10 years to grow into adulthood. You must know that based on the growth cycle of the Frost clan, it will take at least 100 years for a newborn Frost clan baby to grow to adulthood. And in such an environment, it can shorten the time 10 times, which shows that the geographical advantage the necessity for the growth of the Frost clan. Even for a demigod like Lori, if he stays here for a long time, this snow mountain can improve his strength. Therefore, on weekdays, Lori has been practicing at the top of this snow-capped mountain. Until today, because he stayed on the top of the mountain for a long time, Lori's body was covered with a thick layer of ice and snow. If you didn't look carefully, you might even think that the other person was just a rock on the top of the mountain and ignore him unintentionally. But this is not the case for Chen Luo. After successfully killing the demigod-level giants of Jotunheim and integrating it, Chen Luo is now able to perceive the divine power of the Frost clan more easily, especially when he is in a state of cultivation like Lori. Divine power may escape from the body's surface unintentionally, and for Chen Luo, it is as dazzling as a light in the dark night. Previously, because he wanted to explore the distance between his teleportation destination and Lauf, Chen Luo was using his teleportation ability to move around. He also accidentally discovered the divine power escaping on this snow-capped mountain. He followed the perception and looked up. Finally, we successfully found the place where this demigod practices. You must know that if his blood god power wants to continue to grow, these powerful demigods will be indispensable to contribute their strength. Therefore, after discovering the whereabouts of such a demigod, Chen Luo will definitely not miss it. The snow-capped mountain in front of you is nearly 1,000,000 miles away from the palace where Lauf is located. If you can be more careful, it will be extremely difficult for the other party to discover you. In order to prevent Lauf from discovering his traces, Chen Luo did not alert the other giants of Jotunheim living on the mountainside of the snow-capped mountain. He directly teleported to a place on the top of the mountain. After observing in secret for a long time, he waited until he was sure that they were the only ones on the top of the snow-capped mountain. When they were two together, he chose to take action. Looking at the rock-like figure hundreds of meters ahead, a cold light flashed in Chen Luo's eyes. With a thought, Chen Luo disappeared instantly. When he reappeared, he was already behind the demigod. The blood god power surged out silently, turning into a crimson bloody sickle, aiming at the opponent's neck and slashing down hard. Gusts of strong winds, combined with the surrounding ice and snow, caused biting cold winds to hit his face instantly, awakening Lori, who was in a state of cultivation. Subconsciously, he opened his eyes. When he saw the scythe so close in front of him, a flash of surprise flashed through Lori's eyes. He was about to make a move, but in the face of Chen Luo's sudden blow, he couldn't even connect at this moment. It was too late to dodge, and he was struck directly in the neck by the bloody sickle in front of him. Completely unprepared, the sharp sickle instantly cut across Lori's body and cut off his head. Looking at the other party's head falling into the snow, Chen Luo felt relieved and breathed out softly subconsciously. Success. However, at this moment, suddenly, in Lori's headless body, a biting chill instantly broke out and spread violently to the surroundings. Feeling this chill, Chen Luo was suddenly startled and wanted to take action. However, the chill came too suddenly. Before he could make any move, the next moment, his body was instantly enveloped by this chill. The thick layer of ice spread from the body at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, Chen Luo's body was shrouded in ice and turned into an arrogant piece of ice. Not only him, but also the ground under his feet instantly turned into a thick layer of ice under the cold. The top of the mountain, with a radius of several kilometers, was instantly covered with ice. The astonishing coldness spread outwards, instantly causing a wave of ice on the mountainside. Attention of other giants of Jotunheim. Immediately afterwards, inside the body that had lost its head, suddenly, a burst of blue light shone, and Gundam's body instantly turned into ice and snow, and together with the head that fell to the ground at this moment, it also melted into the ice and snow below. Then, as the ice and snow melted, inside the originally tall body, a short body that looked a bit smaller and only about 1.5 meters slowly walked out and came to Chen Luo. No doubt it's Lori. It turns out that the demigod that Chen Luo killed just now was just a disguise that Lori usually made. In fact, his real body was a person who was only about 1.5 meters tall and had a somewhat thin body. It has to be said that as a member of the giants of Jotunheim clan, Lori's existence also belongs to a well-deserved tier. Unlike other giants of Jotunheim, Lori's body is naturally thinner, but Hao Qianwang is corresponding. His accumulation of ice and snow power exceeds everyone else, and his growth rate is far faster than his peers. In this way, in terms of exaggerated growth rate, in just 300 years, Lori officially became a demigod-level existence. But even so, Because his body is very different from other giants of Jotunheim, in order to cover up this abnormality, he has been using divine power to reshape his body to make it look like an ordinary giant. It is precisely because of this that in today's fatal situation, he reversed the situation and successfully carried out a counterattack. Looking at Chen Luo, who had been frozen into an ice sculpture in front of him, Lori raised the corner of his mouth and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Without saying anything, he gathered the divine power in his hand and then formed a spear of frost, stabbing straight forward. However, at the moment when the spear was about to hit Chen Luo, something happened suddenly. Chapter 358, Part 1. The spear thrust forward fiercely, but before it really touched Chen Luo, the next moment, Chen Luo disappeared from the spot. Boom. There was a sound of huge amounts of explosion, and then countless small ice cubes exploded behind Lori, like sharp arrows, rushing towards Lori. Blue divine power instantly emerged from behind, and then in the blink of an eye, a thick layer of ice was formed to defend against the countless ice shards coming from behind. But that's just the beginning. Immediately afterwards, after breaking the ice layer on his body, Chen Luo suddenly appeared in front of the opponent with a thought. He clenched his fists with both hands, and the surface of the fist was covered with a layer of blood, and then he hit the opponent's face hard. Under Chen Luo's teleportation, Lori had no time to prepare, and was instantly hit by Chen Luo. His body flew backwards violently, smashing the ice behind him and throwing it heavily towards Weiji. Damn it, you pissed me off. In the sky, Lori finally came back to his senses. The color of rage flashed through his red eyes, and he roared. Endless divine power surged out of his body, like a vast ocean, overwhelming the sky and the earth. The next moment, the originally overcast sky suddenly changed color. The ice and snow subsided, and countless hailstones fell instantly from the sky with a radius of thousands of miles. The hailstones were each as big as a pebble file size, falling from a high altitude, and smashing downwards with huge amounts of impact. In the brief exchange just now, Lowry also immediately realized the fact that Chen Luo has 240 teleportation abilities. In order to slow down his movements, Lowry immediately summoned endless hail, turning the surrounding area of thousands of miles into his domain, thus stopping Chen Luo. Luo is approaching. As these hailstones fell and hit the top of the snow-capped mountains, huge amounts of impact exploded, making countless holes in the thick ice on the top of the mountain, as if they were hit by countless small meteorites. But such an attack had no impact on Chen Luo at all. The moment these hailstones fell on Chen Luo's body, the impact was completely absorbed by Chen Luo's body. No more damage was caused, and he fell to the ground helplessly. Looking straight ahead, Chen Luo sneered disdainfully, and the wings behind him spread out instantly. With a move of his feet, he instantly rushed towards the sky ahead. Boom! A strong wind came, and Chen Luo turned into a sharp arrow, dragging a long phantom in the air. Huge amounts of wings behind him were like clouds hanging from the sky. He flapped lightly, and his speed suddenly increased in just the blink of an eye. In no time, we successfully approached Lori's location. All the hailstones encountered on the way lost their energy the moment they approached Chen Luo, as they slid to both sides. What? Seeing that his attack had no impact on Chen Luo, Lori subconsciously opened his eyes wide, and a look of shock flashed across his face. But looking at Chen Luo, who was approaching him quickly, Lori reacted immediately. Without thinking, the divine power surged in his body and quickly turned into a thick layer of ice to wrap the whole person. In response to this, Chen Luo's expression did not change at all. His hands were wrapped in rich blood, turned into two heavy hammers, and blasted towards the ice in front of him. Boom! There was a deafening violent sound, and under Chen Luo's attack, Lori, whose body was wrapped in ice, instantly turned into a huge amount of meteorite, falling straight towards the ground below. A trace of bright yellow flame faintly appeared on the edge of the thick ice layer. This was the spark produced when the ice layer and the air rapidly rubbed. The surrounding air rose sharply. The ice layer exploded under Chen Luo's heavy fist, revealing the inside. The body of Lori. As the temperature increased, although under the protection of the ice, Lori had not suffered any injuries, but with the sharp increase in the surrounding air, countless flames rose faintly on his body surface, and severe pain spread throughout his body. All over his body, he couldn't help but let out a scream of pain. The body fell downwards uncontrollably. In just a few seconds, it flew across tens of thousands of meters in the air, and then hit the ground heavily. The unprecedented terrifying impact exploded on the ground, instantly smashing the thick ice into a deep pit of huge amounts, about 100 meters wide, bottomless, and impossible to see to the end. Looking at the deep pit below, a cold look flashed in Chen Luo's eyes, blood surged in his hands, and then a bloody spear formed. Holding the spear, Chen Luo's wings flashed behind him and he swooped down. The strong wind roared, and Chen Luo's figure cut through the sky, dragging a long afterimage in the air. In the blink of an eye, He reached the deep pit on the ground below and then rushed into it. The spear broke through the air and sank downwards, CD, in an instant. At this moment, Lori, who was still in the pit, still couldn't stand up from it. His body was hit by huge amounts of impact, and most of his bones had been broken. Even with the help of divine power, the injuries were slowly healing. But this healing speed was undoubtedly much slower than that of Chen Luo, who had super speed regeneration. Until Chen Luo came to him, his injuries were also only less than half healed. No. Seeing the bloody spear in Chen Luo's hand stabbing towards him, panic flashed in Lori's eyes, and he roared with despair, trying desperately to get up and struggle. But in his current situation, he could no longer stop Chen Luo's movements. The spear sank into his body instantly, breaking a big hole in his body. Blue blood flowed out like a waterfall. Under this spear, Lori's heart was instantly cut into pieces, and life flowed away at a speed visible to the naked eye. Lori's eyes widened, a look of despair in his eyes, and he opened and closed his mouth, trying to say something. But in the end there was still no words were spoken. His eyes were instantly covered with a layer of gray. He lowered his head weakly, and there was no more sound. Seeing Lori's death, Chen Luo flipped his palm and lifted Lori's body up with the tip of his spear. With a move of his feet, he instantly jumped out of the ice and came to the ground. With a thought, the spear in his hand instantly turned into a streak of blood, wrapping Lori's body inside. As the divine power circulated, Lori's body began to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then slowly merged into the blood. Blood light poured into the body again. Chen Luo closed his eyes and felt it carefully. After integrating a new demigod, his divine power has increased again. Compared with before he came, his blood god power has more than doubled. His strength has been further improved. Feeling the power in his body, Chen Luo showed a satisfied smile on his face. However, before he could be happy for long, the next moment, an angry roar came from 1,000,000 miles away. Even the surrounding air shook slightly, and the thunder rolled, making people's hearts skip a beat. Who killed Lori? Not good. Hearing this voice, Chen Luo's heart skipped a beat, and without even thinking about it, he immediately disappeared where he was. In just a few breaths, Chen Luo instantly returned to the location where the portal was set up. He raised his feet and took a step. The moment he crossed the portal, Chen Luo also left Jotunheim and returned to Earth in an instant. Realizing that there was no more Lauf's voice behind him, Chen Luo couldn't help but breathed a sigh of relief. Recalling the scene that just happened, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with doubts subconsciously, and he began to think secretly in his heart. He thought to himself that the action just now was fast enough, but it was still noticed by Lauf. Obviously, he could detect the anomaly here even at such a long distance. It can be seen that there must be some kind of relationship between Lauf and other tribesmen. Connect. It seems that we have to be more careful in our actions in the future. Chen Luo touched his chin and said thoughtfully. Chapter 359, Part 1. Just in case, Chen Luo decided to wait for some time before leaving for Jotunheim. I think I'll have to wait for a while until Lauf lets his guard down again. Then it's time for him to take action. If you choose to take action at this time, once Lauf discovers it, with the opponent's peak demigod strength, even if you have the ability to teleport, it will still be difficult to escape from the opponent's hands. Once he falls into the hands of the opponent, with his current strength, he may have to sleep for several more years before he can reappear in the world. If he has the strength to defeat Lauf now, he will need at least the strength of the peak demigod level. After all, the opponent was once a god-level powerhouse at his peak, and the average peak demigod must be one level stronger. I'm afraid I'll die if I fall in love with him. I don't know how. After making a decision in his mind, Chen Luo also planned to rest for a while and wait until the time is almost up before setting off to Jotunheim for hunting to enhance his strength. Then Chen Luo returned home and rested for less than a week. Suddenly, a familiar phone rang. Picking up the phone and looking at it, Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and asked, "Tony, what's the matter?" "Chen, I have good news for you." On the other end of the phone, Tony's proud voice sounded. "Really?" Chen Luo yawned and said listlessly, "If you have anything to say, please tell me. I'll hang up first if it's okay." "Chen, let me tell you, you are having a lot of fun these days." Hearing Chen Luo's answer, Tony didn't know what he thought of and said with gritted teeth, "Who told you to have Pepper by your side now?" Chen Luo became a little more awake, smiled and said, "Rhodes called you several times, and who told you to refuse again and again? There is no way. In the end, it's just the two of us going to play." "Tony." After a long silence, he said speechlessly, "I really don't know how you can have so many girlfriends. Why do you think you are? You are just handsome, in good health, and rich." As he spoke, Tony's voice became weaker and weaker, and finally became calmer. "Go on. Why don't you say anything anymore?" Chen Luo raised the corners of his mouth slightly, with a proud smile on his face. There was another moment of silence, and finally, Tony's gritted teeth sounded. Damn, okay. You win. Let's talk about business. With that said, Tony quickly changed the topic and told Chen Luo the good news he said. It turns out that today, after nearly 8 years of construction, their base headquarters on Skull Island was finally completed. This call was to invite Chen Luo to visit the base. Skull Island? Chen Luo was stunned for a moment, as if he thought of something, and a trace of thought flashed in his eyes. It's about time. Counting the time, I haven't gone over to take a look for a long time. I don't know how King Kong is doing there. Hearing this, Tony smiled mysteriously and said, You'll find out when you get there. When you see King Kong, you will be surprised too. Chen Luo nodded thoughtfully, asked no more questions, and then said, I see. Then I'll go find you now, and we'll go there together. Then I wait for you. After hanging up the phone, Chen Luo showed no hesitation and disappeared instantly with a thought. The next moment, Tony was in a beachside villa. Chen Luo's figure slowly emerged from the air, and he came to the basement with ease. As expected, Tony is still here busy building his game. Mr. Chen Luo, welcome. After the JRVIS outside the door detected Chen Luo's arrival, the door automatically opened and welcomed Chen Luo in. Tony. Hearing Chen Luo's voice, Tony didn't look back. He held the welding gun in his hand, still spraying flames on the armor in front of him. Just wait a minute, I'll be right here. Chen Luo didn't care about this, shrugged and said, I'll wait for you up there. With that said, Chen Luo returned to the living room above to wait. About 10 minutes later, along with the sound of footsteps, Tony's figure slowly emerged. Nailed it. Chen Luo didn't look back. Tony nodded and replied, No problem. Everything is ready. Chen Luo stood up, turned around and came to Tony. Let's go. I'll take you through teleportation. As he said that, Chen Luo put his right hand on the other person's shoulder. Etc. Tony quickly shook his head and waved his hand to refuse. I'd better fly there by myself. It just so happens that my armor has just been upgraded, and I want to test its performance on the spot. After saying this, Tony looked in the direction of Chen Luo, blinked, and said somewhat provocatively, What, do you want to compete? Which one of us is faster? Please give me flowers. Definitely, teleportation is not allowed. Oh, so confident. Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and said with great interest, Then I want to see how far your armor has reached? Then let's compete. However, you'd better be mentally prepared, and don't be unable to accept the reality in the end. Tony raised his eyebrows and smiled. Chen, don't underestimate me. You may not be able to beat me this time. After this upgrade, my armor is far stronger than the first generation. This time, I think you should be prepared to lose. Really? Chen Luo smiled slightly and said, Then let's compete. If I win, you have to agree to my request. Oh, what's the request? It's very simple. Chen Luo pretended to be casual and said, If I win, within the next week, you have to tell everyone you meet that Chen Luo is the most handsome and charming man you know. How about it? Do you dare to agree? What? Tony's expression changed, his brows furrowed, and he stared at him for a long time, then gritted his teeth and said, Chen, I can't tell you that you are becoming more and more shameless. Stop talking nonsense and just tell me whether you dare to agree or not. Dare? What's wrong with you? Tony's face hardened, and he nodded in agreement without any hesitation. But if you lose, you have to do the same thing. No problem, it's settled then. Chen Luo also nodded immediately, his face full of confidence. Just wait and praise me properly, Tony. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Luo moved his feet and ran towards the door in an instant. Seeing this scene, Tony was stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted and shouted with a ferocious face, Damn it, Chen, stop it. We haven't even started yet. You didn't say when it would start? It's better to accept the fate of failure. Tony. Chen Luo laughed and rushed out of the door, spreading his wings behind his back and soaring into the sky. This bastard. Tony ran back to the basement with his eyes split open. He put on his armor in a panic, then quickly activated it, with blazing flames erupting from the ends of his limbs, and he flew quickly towards the passage. Damn it, Chen. Wait for me. We want a fair fight with. Chapter 360, Part 1. The two of them reached their destination smoothly in less than an hour at several times the speed of sound. It is still the familiar Bermuda area. The sky thousands of miles away is shrouded in huge amounts of clouds. In this area, countless thunder and lightning are constantly shuttling through the clouds, with lightning and thunder, and strong winds roaring, sweeping in all directions. The sea below, shrouded in clouds, occasionally stirred up huge waves, and a figure of huge amounts appeared from time to time in the dark sea. Even if only a small part of it is exposed, its huge size can still be seen faintly, just like a small island, with sharp spines on its dorsal fin reaching into the sky, making it look extremely ferocious. If it was 10 years ago when Chen Luo and Tony first met, neither of them would have been able to overcome this kind of weather, but today, 10 years later, this kind of weather can no longer have any impact on them. Completely ignoring the weather in front of him, Chen Luo flapped his wings behind him, dragging a long afterimage of his body for 7-3 in the air, and rushed forward quickly. No matter whether there were strong winds or heavy rains on the way, even if there were violent thunder and lightning falling from the sky from time to time, hitting Chen Luo directly, but under Chen Luo's energy conversion, these attacks eventually turned into streams of energy flowing into the body, completely unable to do anything, have any impact on him. And about half a minute after Chen Luo left, Tony, wearing a battle armor, finally arrived outside Bermuda. There was also no hesitation at all. The battle armor dragged a long tail flame, instantly breaking through the sound barrier, and white air waves burst out in the air and rushed forward quickly. The strong wind could not stop Tony's footsteps at all. Thunder and lightning fell from the sky, hitting the armor directly. Ding! Electric energy has been detected and is being charged. 72%, 73%, 74%, 100%. In this rebuilt armor, in order to improve the endurance of the armor, Tony specially upgraded the charging system of the armor. After the upgrade, not only the energy core on his chest can provide power for the armor, but also even lightning in nature can be absorbed and utilized, which is a lot more convenient. Due to the superior performance of the armor, the weather in Bermuda had no impact on it at this moment. Following Chen Luo, it only took about 10 minutes to instantly break through the front barrier and successfully reach the Skull Island area. After arriving at Skull Island, the surrounding weather had completely changed color. The sky was clear and cloudless, and the sun was shining brightly. The golden sunlight fell on the island below, illuminating the entire island. In the center of this huge amount of island, a huge base covering an area of tens of thousands of square meters is located. It stretches for a long time, with tall buildings towering, and is surrounded by a long steel wall. It looks extremely majestic. The two of them kept speeding and quickly turned into the sky above the island. Then in front of this huge base, Chen Luo retracted his wings behind him and turned into a small meteor, falling straight down. Boom! With a loud noise, Chen Luo instantly fell to the ground, smashing a deep pit into the ground. Under the impact of huge amounts of impact, countless cracks suddenly spread on the ground, and countless gravel exploded. The movement was huge, and instantly it attracted the attention of the person responsible for guarding the base. Who? At the gate of the base, a team of vampires were responsible for guarding, holding the latest firearms manufactured by the Stark Group, running towards the place at several times the speed of ordinary people. Looking at the deep pit in front of them, they all pointed their firearms forward with alert expressions. "Don't be nervous. It's me." A voice suddenly sounded from inside the pit, and then, Chen Luo slowly walked out of the pit and came to the crowd. "Boss." The moment they saw Chen Luo, several people were stunned for a moment, and then they immediately reacted. Their expressions changed, they all lowered their heads and spoke respectfully. Chen Luo nodded, with a smile on his face, and encouraged, "Thank you for your hard work." Hearing Chen Luo's encouragement, several people's hearts were shocked, excitement appeared on their faces, and their expressions were obviously uplifted. After briefly encouraging a few people, Chen Luo did not let them stay here and wave them back. Then he stayed where he was and waited silently. Not long after, a huge amount of sonic boom sounded from far to near, and a figure about 2 meters tall, wrapped in steel armor, gradually approached Chen Luo and slowly fell downwards. Click. Arriving at the ground, the metal mask on the armor's head opened, revealing Tony's face. List. Tony looked at Chen Luo with a dark face and full of displeasure. "You bastard. How could you come up with such a despicable method? No, let's compete again. If it's a fair competition, I can't lose to you." Chen Luo did not agree to the other party's idea at all. He rolled his eyes and looked at him with disdain. "What? You can't afford to lose? What did you say?" Tony glared and said angrily, "If you bastard hadn't jumped the gun, how could I have lost? So, you want to cheat?" Faced with Chen Luo's contemptuous gaze, Tony was finally defeated. He sighed deeply, lowered his head, and said helplessly, Okay, I get it. Damn, why don't I just admit defeat? Then the bet between us? Rest assured." Tony stared at him, gritted his teeth, and said word by word, "I will abide by the agreement." "That's good." Chen Luo nodded with satisfaction, not caring about his eyes that seemed to want to kill dead man, and turned around and walked towards the base behind him. "Then let's go in and take a look at the situation of this base." Tony saw this and quickly followed. "You probably don't know much about this place yet. Let me introduce it to you." With that said, Tony controlled all the armors to be opened, then walked out of it, and walked into the steel wall in front of them with Chen Luo, and walked into the base. This area is a living area, which can provide housing for about 10,000 people. Now there are about 6,000 guards and 2,000 researchers here. There is also an experimental area used to study various animals and plants on Skull Island. The main research direction is about gene strengthening. By the way, there's still this place. 5.1 The two walked to the easternmost edge of the base and pointed at the semicircular building in front of them. Tony turned his head to look at Chen Luo, smiled mysteriously, and then said, "As for this, it is King Kong's residence. In addition to going out for hunting, King Kong spends most of his time here resting and playing." After a few brief introductions, Tony stretched out his right hand and made a gesture of invitation. "How about it? Do you want to go in and have a look?" Following the direction he pointed, looking at the building in front of him covering an area of huge amounts, Chen Luo's eyes flashed and he chuckled, "That's for sure." With that said, Chen Luo walked forward first. Soon, under the leadership of Tony, the two walked into the building. When they saw the scene inside the building, Chen Luo's face moved, and a trace of amazement flashed in his eyes. This is Chapter 361, Part 1. Only huge amounts of money were seen inside this building. The area of tens of thousands of square meters is surrounded by dense jungle, lush and full of life. Looking down from the sky, in this jungle shrouded by tall trees, there are also many ancient creatures living here, following the most primitive survival laws. Looking upward, I saw a few hundred meters in the sky, at the top of the building, a bright sun hanging high, emitting endless heat, illuminating the earth below brightly. This round of tomorrow is a lighting system specially manufactured by the Stark Group to play the role of the sun in this small ecosystem. All types of life live harmoniously in this area, forming a dynamic balance. Passing through this dense jungle and arriving at the center of the area, there is a huge plain. The jungle disappears and is replaced by a patch of green grass, spread flat on the ground, blown by the surrounding breeze. The grass dances slightly, looking harmonious and natural. Near this plain, which is about 1,000 meters long, stands a lake of huge amounts. The lake also has an area of about 1,000 meters, providing water sources for the creatures living here. But what's more important here is that it's a place where a giant creature usually plays and rests, just like it does now. When Chen Luo and the two walked through the jungle and arrived at the center of this area, a black hill suddenly appeared in front of them. If you look closely, you will see that this is not a hill, but a huge ape that is over 100 meters in size. No, to be more precise, the word orangutan should be used more accurately. The two of them floated quietly above the sky, looking at the self-shaped creature that was lying on the plain below with its eyes closed tightly. His whole body is covered with black hair, his limbs are thick, and his four fangs outside his lips are exposed in the air. Even in a deep sleep state, he can feel an extremely oppressive power from him, which makes people's hearts become heavier. Under such power, no creature in the entire area dared to disturb its sleep. The surrounding area was silent, with only the thunderous snores exploding in the plains. When he saw it for the first time, even though he hadn't seen it for 10 years, Chen Luo still recognized him at a glance. This giant creature is undoubtedly King Kong. Even though he had expected it, the moment he saw King Kong, Chen Luo couldn't help but feel a hint of surprise in his heart. In just 10 years, King Kong's size would be larger than the last time he saw it. It has nearly doubled in size, from the original 50 meters to 100 meters, as if it has officially entered a mature stage. How about it? You were scared too, right? Next to Chen Luo, Tony turned his head and said with a smile, "You guys haven't been back in the past few years. Rhodes and I have watched King Kong grow up step by step. It is much more powerful now than it was 10 years ago." "Got it. Really?" Chen Luo smiled. "Since we haven't seen it for so long, I'll go down and say hello to it." As he spoke, Chen Luo slowly floated downwards. Roar. Just when Chen Luo and the two descended to a distance of about 100 meters away from King Kong, suddenly, there was a loud noise that shook the sky. At some point, King Kong, who was originally sleeping, quietly opened his eyes, looked up to the sky and let out a roar of huge amounts, and then quickly got up from the ground, beating his chest with file-sized fists like a small mountain bag, like beating a drum. Generally, the surrounding air is slightly shaken. Looking towards the sky, when it saw the figures of Chen Luo and Chen Luo above, King Kong's eyes suddenly showed a touch of human joy, and his roar gradually began to calm down. He slowly came to King Kong and stared at him quietly for a long time. Finally, Chen Luo said, "Long time no see." King Kong. Roar. Although King Kong only made roars with unknown meanings, relying on the blood connection between the two, Chen Luo could still vaguely sense the meaning of the other's roars. After successfully transforming King Kong into the Source Blood Clan, as the source of all Blood Clan, there is an inexplicable connection between all beings with Chen Luo's bloodline and Chen Luo, especially for a being like King Kong who grew up alone since childhood. After establishing contact with Chen Luo, he regarded him as his own father. The relationship between the two is absolutely extraordinary. Therefore, even though they had not seen each other for nearly 10 years, King Kong still recognized Chen Luo at a glance. "It seems like you've had a good life these years. Tony and the others have taken good care of you." Looking at King Kong's current mountain-like figure, Chen Luo nodded slightly and said with a smile, That's definitely. Tony on the side rolled his eyes and said, "Do you think I have spent all these years in vain?" In addition to hunting for food normally, King Kong also has a diet specially tailored for him by the biological experts I brought to ensure adequate nutritional intake. If not for this, King Kong would have to grow to where he is now, but he would have to continue to grow. It will take more than 10 years. You may not know how much King Kong's annual food expenses are. It costs at least $1 billion every year. Plus the cost of construction, experiments, and personnel, we have to invest $20 billion on Skull Island every year. Huge. If we hadn't joined forces, we would have gone bankrupt long ago if we were another company. After hearing Tony's words, Chen Luo had some understanding of the situation on Skull Island, and he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Calculated in this way, 10 years later, the two of them have invested a total of $200 billion in this island. Such a figure is enough to buy a country. But such investment 813 is worth it in Chen Luo's opinion. Based on the value of Skull Island, if it is fully developed, it will definitely be no less than the sum of their two groups combined. It is not an exaggeration to say that one sound is enough to change the world. Just like their current research, they are advancing the research and development of human body strengthening by studying the genes of animals and plants on this island. Just like Captain America decades ago, if they can achieve results and successfully develop genetic medicine to strengthen soldiers, then their strength will skyrocket to an unprecedented level. Regarding this point, Chen Luo and Tony have already discussed this. Especially after Tony became Iron Man and officially started the superhero era, Chen Luo, who is well aware of how many crises the Earth will face in the future, understands even more. For opponents who will become more and more powerful in the future, this potion is absolutely indispensable. After about 10 years of research, although the potion has still not been successfully developed, most of the progress has been completed. If everything goes well, it won't be long before the potion will be successfully launched. But these are not what Chen Luo needs to think about now. Looking at King Kong in front of him, Chen Luo pondered for a moment, with a smile of interest on his face. Speaking of which, I haven't seen King Kong's current strength. Otherwise, let's try it now? As soon as these words came out, Tony was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up quickly. Chapter 362, Part 1. Chen, you mean, you want to compete with King Kong? I do have this idea. Chen Luo nodded, looked at King Kong in front of him, and smiled. King Kong, what do you think? Dal. King Kong obviously understood what Chen Luo meant and beat his chest. Then, a powerful aura slowly rose from his huge body. It is the aura of the top predator in nature. It is powerful and ferocious, and at the same time full of a sense of violence. Even if you just look at it from a distance, you can't help but be frightened. Just like Tony now, without the protection of the armor, Tony is just an ordinary person. After feeling the aura emanating from King Kong, his heart couldn't help but become extremely heavy, as if it was pressed against a big stone. Even breathing seems much more difficult. Sensing Tony's abnormality, Chen Luo turned his head and said, Tony, just take a look here. Don't worry, it won't take long. Then I have to take a closer look. The corner of Tony's mouth curled up and he teased, but don't worry, I won't stand on your side this time. On the contrary, I think King Kong may have a greater chance of winning. Yeah. Chen Luo looked calm. How about it? Do you want to bet again? As for the bet, the previous bet can be extended for another week. Tony. Forget it. Just kidding. Asking him to praise Chen Luo against his will for 1 week is already the limit he can accept. If it is extended for another week, he will really go crazy. Don't you dare? Then just stay aside and stay quietly. After that, Chen Luo ignored the guy, waved his hand and sent it hundreds of meters away, then turned his head and looked forward. Okay, now, we can start. Roar. As soon as he finished speaking, the next moment, King Kong burst out with a roar. The roar shook the sky, and the surrounding air began to vibrate slightly. The next moment, King Kong punched out with a fierce punch. The fist containing thousands of tons of power instantly shattered the air in front of him. White air waves spread outward in circles, making a series of roars and slamming forward. Facing such an attack, Chen Luo looked calm and had no intention of evading. He stretched out his right hand to block the attack. The moment the fists and palms met, but judging from the appearance, one of King Kong's fists was several times the size of Chen Luo. In front of King Kong, Chen Luo was like a monkey suppressed by Wuzhishan, with no chance of winning. But this is exactly the opposite for Chen Luo. Under the energy conversion ability, even in terms of real power, King Kong is much stronger than Chen Luo, but as long as it does not exceed his upper limit, it will not have any impact on him. And King Kong's power does not exceed Chen Luo's upper limit. Therefore, when faced with this punch, the moment the two collided, all the energy contained in the Vajra fist was instantly absorbed by Chen Luo and turned into nutrients that improved physical fitness. And when it comes to power, after growing into a mature state, King Kong's power is only slightly stronger than Hulk. For Chen Luo, it is still unable to cause any harm. After successfully blocking King Kong's punch, Chen Luo thought, and the energy originally belonging to King Kong was instantly converted, and then formed a shockwave of energy that condensed from the palm of Chen Luo's right hand and rushed forward. Dazzling light shined, and this shockwave formed a dazzling light pillar, about 10 meters thick, which instantly enveloped King Kong's fist. In the blink of an eye, a huge amount of blood hole appeared on the fist that was like a hill. Shockwave rushed towards King Kong's chest unabated. Huge amounts of impact hit him, making King Kong couldn't help but take a few steps back. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. The arm hung down weakly, dripping with blood. Feeling the severe pain from his hand, King Kong's eyes were instantly covered with a red color, and he roared to the sky, and the deafening roar resounded throughout the entire space. If it was 10 years ago, such an injury would have been enough to affect King Kong, but now, after successfully integrating Chen Luo's blood, King Kong already has strong recovery power. Even if he suffers this level of injury, healing begins at a speed visible to the naked eye. According to this recovery speed, it will only take a few minutes to return to the original state. But now, with the injury to his arm, it is obviously not enough to participate in the battle, and part of his strength has been damaged. With his current state, it is undoubtedly further out of reach to defeat Chen Luo. So the next situation is already obvious. Under the energy conversion ability, King Kong's power cannot cause any harm to Chen Luo. In addition, under Chen Luo's energy conversion, King Kong's power was also used by him to fight back. Under the ebb and flow of one another, King Kong was also defeated step by step. Not long after that, this extremely disparate battle came to an end. Boom! King Kong's figure instantly fell to the ground, dripping with blood, with wounds all over his body, his chest rising and falling rapidly, and he was breathing heavily. Although the injury seems to be serious, it is not enough to cause fatal damage to King Kong. While it is resting, King Kong's injuries are also beginning to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it will not be long before he can return to his original state. You should have a good rest here, Da. Chen Luo comforted him softly, then turned around and flew in the direction of Tony. How about it? Coming to Tony, Chen Luo replied with a smile on his face. Just average, Tony said harshly. Seeing this, Chen Luo shook his head, said nothing, and walked out of the building with Tony. Then Tony took Chen Luo to visit all the places in the base. It wasn't until it got dark that the two of them got up and planned to go home. Definitely, this time Tony still rejected Chen Luo's proposal to teleport back, and chose to drive back in the armor. Correct. Just before leaving, Tony suddenly thought of something, money, and said to Chen Luo, the relocation of the group has been started. Chun, how are you? Chen Luo nodded. The place has been chosen for you. I'll wait for you to come over next. Hearing Chen Luo's answer, a smile appeared on Tony's face, then it settled. In another month at most, if everything goes well, we can meet in New York right away. At that time, I'll call that guy Rod, and then we'll have another party together. You make the arrangements. Chen Luo had no objection to this, and immediately nodded in agreement. After the discussion, Chen Luo did not intend to accompany him in any flight competition, and directly used his teleportation ability to return home. However, less than 10 minutes after he returned home, the next moment, along with a rapid ringing of the phone, the urgent voice of the temple owner immediately reached Chen Luo's ears. Chun, come and help. Chapter 363, Part 1. Huh? What's going on? Hearing Tony's urgent voice, Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and said with some doubts, Don't talk so much now, come and help me. Tony's voice suddenly became more urgent. At the same time, through the phone, Chen Luo could still hear the crashing of the turbulent waves, and the howling wind all around covered up the sound of the temple. If his hearing hadn't already surpassed that of ordinary people, he might not have been able to hear clearly. Tony, what happened to you over there? Did you fall into the water? As if thinking of something, Chen Luo's face changed slightly, and he couldn't believe it. You must know that Tony flew all the way here wearing his armor, and after his transformation and upgrade, the endurance of the armor has been greatly enhanced. Logically speaking, returning from Skull Island should not be a problem. But on the contrary, it seems that something is wrong with Tony now, and listening to the sounds coming from around him, he may have fallen into the sea. This situation can only happen if there is a problem with his armor. Once the protection of the armor is lost, Tony's ordinary physical fitness will probably be difficult to survive in the sea. As soon as he thought of 157, Chen Luo's eyes suddenly became solemn, and he asked in a deep voice where the other party was now. After struggling to tell the location, Tony's increasingly anxious voice sounded. Chun, hurry up. My war is about to run out of steam. Later I will use the last of my energy to fire flares into the sky. The rest is up to you. As soon as he said this, the phone was instantly covered in noise, and Tony's voice was completely covered in it. After hanging up the phone, Chen Luo didn't show any hesitation. With a thought, he disappeared instantly. When he reappeared, he had returned to the waters of Bermuda. He spread his wings and flew to the location Tony mentioned. As he gradually approached, suddenly, a ray of light lit up in the sky, dragging a long tail flame, illuminating the sky. Seeing the light that suddenly appeared in the sky, Chen Luo's eyes flashed and he instantly understood that Tony's signal bomb had been sent out. With his wings flapping, Chen Luo instantly dragged out a long afterimage in the air and flew quickly towards the location of the flare. His eyes kept scanning the sea below. Soon, relying on his strong hearing, Chen Luo suddenly heard a familiar cry for help. "Chun, come and help. Chun, save me." Looking in the direction of the sound and looking at the figure struggling in the rough waves on the sea below, Chen Luo's eyes flashed and he immediately took action. With a thought, the divine power in the body quickly emerged and then formed a huge amount of blood-colored palm, which quickly extended downwards. Falling into the water accurately, he held Tony, who was struggling in the sea and was about to lose his hold, in his hands, and then shrank back in the direction of Chen Luo. But at the moment Tony had just escaped from the sea, before Tony could finally breathe a sigh of relief, the sea below rolled for a while, and then a ferocious and slender tentacle shot out from the sea and swept towards Tony. Seeing this scene, Tony's scalp suddenly became numb and he felt like he was dead. Without thinking, he shouted for help. List. Regarding the situation below, Chen Luo definitely noticed it. His eyes flashed and his mind turned. The next moment, the bloody palm wrapped around Tony quickly began to split, and a new bloody palm emerged from the side, and then grabbed the tentacle below. During the fall, the blood-red palm swelled in the wind, and in the blink of an eye it grew to hundreds of times its original file size. Like a hill, it cut through the air in front of it, quickly reached into the sea below, and reached out to fish it out. Wow! A huge amount of seawater flows down from this palm and falls back to the sea surface. At the same time, in this huge palm that is over 100 meters long, a huge octopus of about 70 meters in size is currently being held tightly. The whole body is pitch black, with blue patterns twining around the surface of the skin, and dozens of tentacles dancing outwards, making it look extremely ferocious. Looking at the huge amounts of deep-sea octopus below, Tony felt a chill in his heart. After he came to his senses, he secretly felt extremely lucky. Fortunately, Chen Luo arrived in time this time. If it had been a little later, even if he hadn't sunk to the bottom of the sea, he would have been dragged into the deep sea by this giant octopus and eaten alive as prey. Looking at the giant octopus in his hand, Chen Luo made a thought and exerted force on his palm. Huge amounts of power instantly acted on the opponent, crushing it into a ball of flesh and then throwing it back to the sea. Then bringing Tony to his side, Chen Luo asked, "Going to your house next?" Tony nodded tiredly and replied, "Let's go back first. I feel that there may be something wrong with my body. I need to ask Weiss to check it out for me." Hearing Tony's answer, Chen Luo frowned slightly, but without saying anything, he used his teleportation ability and took Tony back home instantly. "Chun, take me to the studio." Chen Luo nodded and led him towards the basement. Arriving at the studio, Tony lay on a recliner and said tiredly, "JRVIS, help me take a look at my body. What's wrong with me?" It turned out that just when Tony put on his armor and was about to return home, shortly after flying out of Skull Island, Tony suddenly felt a cramp in his chest, his consciousness suddenly became blurred, and his body fell uncontrollably toward the sea below. It was raining continuously at night, and at the same time, an extremely dazzling blue lightning suddenly fell from the sky, and it hit Tony's armor directly. Maybe there are still some loopholes in Tony's design, or maybe the energy contained in this lightning exceeds the upper limit of what the armor can withstand. After this lightning falls, the power system of the armor gradually fails and can no longer carry it. Continue to fly. Under such circumstances, if no one comes to rescue him, I am afraid that he will really be buried under the sea today. After being rescued by Chen Luo, Tony immediately remembered the abnormality in his body. This was something that had never happened before, so it immediately aroused his vigilance. The next moment Tony was lying on the recliner, a laser instantly swept across Tony's body, and not long after, the voice of JRVIS sounded. "Sir, your body has detected an excess of palladium. If it is not cleaned up in time, your life may be in danger." Hearing JRVIS's answer, Tony subconsciously opened his eyes wide and exclaimed, "Palladium? How is this possible?" While Tony was still in a state of confusion, on the other side, Chen Luo suddenly understood Tony's situation. Sure enough, it came anyway. Chapter 364, Part 1. Tony's situation is definitely clear to Chen Luo, who is familiar with the plot. The reason why this happened is because of the small arc reactor built by Tony. Due to previous injuries, Tony can only maintain basic life activities by relying on the energy provided by a small reactor. Once the reactor fails, the shrapnel in his body will flow into his heart along the bloodstream. At that time, his life will truly come to an end. Therefore, for him, the small arc reactor is not only the energy source to maintain the activity of the armor, but also the basic device to maintain his life. Its importance to him can be imagined. As the top priority of this small reactor, palladium is an essential component. Because this device is placed inside the body, with every operation of the reactor, a trace amount of palladium will flow into Tony's body along the blood. Definitely there will be no problem if it is just to maintain normal life operations, but if it is added if the armor is kept running, the danger will be greatly increased. When wearing the armor for activities or fighting, the energy consumption of the reactor is hundreds or thousands of times greater than maintaining normal life activities. Similarly, in this state, the amount of palladium flowing into the body will also greatly increase. As time accumulates, the damage to the body will become greater and greater. It has been 2 months since Tony built the reactor. As he announced his identity as Iron Man to the world, in these days, he has been driving his armor to various parts of the world to carry out rescue activities. Although his behavior has gained him a large number of fans and admirers around the world, in contrast, the rate of accumulation of palladium in his body has also greatly increased. Under such circumstances, it only took 2 months. As the palladium accumulated to a certain level, his body finally couldn't bear it and he became poisoned. If this continues, Tony's life may come to an end within half a year at most. While Chen Luo was thinking about this, on the other side, Tony finally woke up from the shock and gradually came back to his senses. As if he had thought of something, Tony's face looked extremely complicated at the moment, his face darkened, and he had obviously thought of the cause of his palladium poisoning. Is it because of this? Subconsciously, he touched the reactor on his chest. Looking at the faint blue light in his chest, Tony's eyes were extremely complicated. Why? Do you know the reason? Chen Luo's voice sounded. Tony nodded silently. He had nothing to hide from Chen Luo and immediately told him his current situation. Just as Chen Luo thought, the reason why Tony felt unwell before was because of excessive accumulation of palladium in the body. How about it? Can it be cured? Chen Luo thought for a while, raised his head, looked at a camera in front of him and asked, Mr. Chen Luo, there is currently no treatment for palladium poisoning, but taking an appropriate amount of vitamins every day can provide relief. Huh? Tony smiled bitterly, shook his head, and said helplessly, It seems that I have to drink vegetable juice every day from now on, right? After lowering his head and thinking for a moment, Tony then asked, JRVIS, how long can my body last? Sir, according to the diffusion rate of palladium, even if vegetable juice is used as relief, it will only take 4 months at most before the palladium will spread throughout the body. What will happen if it spreads throughout the body? JRVIS. Seeing JRVIS fall into silence, Tony also understood its meaning. The corners of his mouth became even more bitter, and he shook his head, his eyes dim. Seeing Tony's dejected look at this moment, Chen Luo's face was calm, without any panic at all, and he said calmly, It seems it's time to remove the reactor on your chest. How about it? Do you want my help? As long as I transform you, this injury will be healed in less than a minute. Hearing Chen Luo's words, Tony was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately reacted and his spirit sharpened. It was also at this time that he remembered Chen Luo's identity. They had been together for too long, and over time, he had forgotten that Chen Luo was of a completely different race from him. As a vampire, he not only possesses the physical fitness of Superman, but also has the terrifying resilience that is enough to reborn a broken limb. With such recovery ability, if he were also transformed into a vampire, the wounds in his body that are now lethal would be very harmful to him. It's no longer a problem. Not only can his body be restored to its peak state, but it can even reach the level of strength like Superman, and his lifespan can be increased hundreds or thousands of times. Compared with weak humans, the former's various advantages are undoubtedly it has great attraction. Please give me flowers. Even Tony is no exception. After thinking that his life was guaranteed, Tony finally calmed down. As his rationality returned, he couldn't help but have other thoughts about his current situation. List. After thinking for a moment, Tony raised his head and said seriously, I still want to try first to see if I can solve this problem by myself. If a solution to palladium poisoning is found within these 4 months, I will continue to remain a human being. But if I fail... Speaking of this, Tony paused for a long time, sighed helplessly, and then said, Then please transform me. Although I am still more accustomed to being a human being, if there is no other way, I will have to become a vampire like you. Zero hearing Tony's answer, Chen Luo shook his head slightly, also feeling helpless. I don't know what you are struggling with. What's wrong with becoming a vampire? And now that I have evolved, all the weaknesses of a vampire have been made up for by me. In addition to needing to drink blood regularly, I can also be like ordinary people the rest of the time. No different. Compared to the benefits of becoming a vampire, this should be nothing, right? Tony nodded silently. Chun, you are right. Compared to humans, vampires do have many advantages, but after all, I have been a human being for so long. It is still a bit too difficult for me to give up this identity. Okay. Chen Luo sighed softly and didn't embarrass him too much. Then you try it first and see if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you can contact me again. I will personally help you transform when the time comes. Then I'll trouble you. Don't say such kind words to me. Chen Luo waved his hand, turned and walked towards the door. Then I'll leave first. If you need my help in the future, please contact me anytime. Don't worry, there's really nothing we can do about it then, and I won't be polite to you. The moment he said these words, Chen Luo's figure disappeared instantly. Seeing where Chen Luo disappeared, the smile on Tony's face paused. He slowly got up from the recliner and said in a deep voice, "Then it's time for us to start working." JRVIS. Chapter 365, Part 1. In the blink of an eye, more than 3 months have passed. On this day, Skull Island, a wasteland of huge amounts. Boom! Deafening loud noises continued to sound in this wasteland. At the same time, on the vast plains in the wasteland, smoke and dust billowed, covering the sky and the sun, covering an area of about a kilometer, making it impossible to see the inside. Scene. Roar. Suddenly, with a huge roar, a huge figure that was hundreds of meters tall and completely black flew out of the smoke and dust and hit the ground heavily, creating a deep pit in the ground. Looking down carefully, this figure is undoubtedly King Kong. Struggling to get up, he saw a huge fist mark visible to the naked eye deeply engraved on King Kong's chest. Several ribs in his chest were broken, and blood poured out like a small waterfall. 590 looks extremely ferocious and terrifying. If it were an ordinary person, such an injury would be fatal, but for King Kong, an injury of this level could be healed quickly in less than a minute. Click. The broken bones began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wounds gradually disappeared and blood stopped flowing out. At the same time, the originally sunken chest also slowly floated upward. In less than a minute, all the injuries healed. King Kong has also returned to his peak condition again. 03L. He kept beating his chest with both hands, and his red eyes stared straight into the smoke and dust that was constantly emitting loud noises in front of him. Huge amounts of roaring sounded, and then he moved his feet, leaped into the sky, and threw it forward. Hulk, attack. At the same time, inside the billowing smoke, there was also a roar of huge amounts, and then, a strong wind suddenly emerged from the smoke and spread rapidly to the surroundings. The strong wind blew, and the surrounding smoke and dust began to dissipate at a speed visible to the naked eye. After just a few breaths, the surrounding air became clear, completely revealing the imperial elephant inside. I saw in the center of the original smoke and dust, a giant about 3 meters tall, covered in dark green skin, waving his fists with a ferocious expression at this moment. The muscles of his arms were knotted, and there were green and black blood vessels all over the place like the roots of old trees. On both arms, the 2 arms waved out a series of afterimages, and strong winds blasted forward like a violent storm. This figure is undoubtedly Hulk. At this moment, Hulk's eyes were widened, and his black pupils with streaks of green in them were now filled with violence. The anger continued to spread in his heart, as if he was going to burn the world in front of him. Full of unspeakable, terrifying, destructive power. In front of Hulk, Chen Luo's face was calm, and he was waving his hands rapidly. The surface of his palms was covered with a layer of blood. As he waved his palms, he blocked all Hulk's attacks. Even though Hulk carries thousands of tons of power with each punch, as long as such power does not exceed Chen Luo's endurance range, it will be converted into energy and absorbed by him. Therefore, in a sense, Hulk's attack is not effective against Chen Luo. To him, it is simply a nutrient existence. And this is true. The reason why Chen Luo fights Hulk is to absorb enough energy to improve his physical fitness and reach the current limit physically. In order to achieve the fastest growth in physical fitness, Chen Luo had an idea in his mind after experiencing the power of King Kong more than 3 months ago. If he could fight these two at the same time, with their almost identical strengths, the energy they could provide him would undoubtedly be doubled, and at the same time, it would also greatly reduce the time it took for him to improve his physical fitness. Now, after more than 3 months, Chen Luo has gained huge amounts of physical growth and is very close to his current limit. Maybe after today's battle, his physique can reach the standard to start the road to becoming a god. Roar. Just as Chen Luo was resisting Hulk's attack, a strong wind blew violently behind him, and then, a huge fist that was several meters long fell from the sky and crashed towards Chen Luo's head. Facing King Kong's heavy fist, Chen Luo remained motionless, standing on the spot and letting his fist fall. Huge amounts of fist are like a heavy hammer, hitting the target instantly. The moment the two came into contact, the powerful kinetic energy was instantly absorbed by Chen Luo, and then turned into nutrients to improve his physique. Without the blessing of kinetic energy, King Kong's heavy punch did not cause any harm to Chen Luo, and he was light and airy. It landed on top of Chen Luo's head and could no longer be deposited. Roar. Seeing this scene, King Kong's eyes turned red again, and he swung out his other arm, straight towards Chen Luo. The wind roared, accompanied by a strong gust of wind, and the next moment, another huge amount of fist hit Chen Luo behind. But the punch containing thousands of tons of power still failed to cause any harm to Chen Luo. As the energy contained in it was absorbed by Chen Luo, the fist stopped behind Chen Luo and could no longer move forward. The next moment, Chen Luo's eyes narrowed, and he stretched out his hands quickly, holding the fist blasted by the Hulk in front of him. His muscles tensed up, he violently took it with him, and then threw it back with all his strength. Boom! With gusts of strong wind, Hulk's body was thrown out uncontrollably, and an afterimage streaked through the air, instantly flying backwards and hitting King Kong's body behind him. Huge amounts of impact force exploded. Under Hulk's impact, Hulk and King Kong flew backwards for tens of meters uncontrollably before hitting the ground heavily. A heavy sound sounded, and the moment King Kong hit the ground, the earth instantly cracked, and countless cracks began to spread outward rapidly. Then, under the heavy tonnage of King Kong, it instantly sank, forming a huge amount of deep pit and countless gravel. Falling down, they were buried underground in the blink of an eye. At the moment when the two were knocked away, Chen Luo had a thought in his mind and instantly called up the panel to start checking. Host: Chen Luo race, source blood clan strength, 450, 1 for a healthy adult male, 4.9 speed, 220 spirit, 550 physique, 499.9 skills, fighting technique, high, knife skills master, Proxima midnight magic, high ability, blood god power evaluation. Congratulations, as a demigod, you have entered the forest of strong men in the universe, but compared to those real overlords, you are not enough to compete with them now. As this battle came to an end, finally, after more than 3 months, Chen Luo's physical condition reached a critical point. Looking at the numbers displayed in the physical fitness column on the panel, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with light, and he thought to himself, now that we have reached this point, then, as he expected, the next moment, a familiar voice sounded in the depths of Chen Luo's mind. OJ. Chapter 366, Part 1. Ding. It has been detected that the host's physical attributes have reached the critical value, and the road to becoming a god in the physical body has begun. The first step on the road to becoming a god, blood sacrifice. Blood sacrifice conditions. Kill all living things on an entire planet and wipe them out of the universe along with the planet. WTF? Seeing the conditions displayed on the system, Chen Luo opened his eyes with disbelief written all over his face. Blood sacrifice to an entire planet? Chen Luo really didn't expect that in the path of soul becoming a god that he started before, the condition of killing millions of creatures was already outrageous enough. He didn't expect that the conditions required for the body to become a god were even more exaggerated. It actually had to kill all life on an entire planet, and in addition, it also had to destroy the planet originally. The difference in difficulty between this and the former is simply unreasonable. Not to mention how much life there is on a planet, just talking about the difficulty of destroying a planet is not something that ordinary people can accomplish. Even with Chen Luo's current power, it is difficult to destroy a planet. 23. If he really wants to reach such a point, I am afraid that it will only be possible when his power grows to the peak state of a demigod. But it is still far away for Chen Luo to grow to that point. In the past 3 months, although he has patronized Jotunheim from time to time and harvested the powerful demigods there, as many as 5 demigods have fallen in his hands over such a long period of time. Thanks to his hard work, there are no other gods in Jotunheim except Lauf, the king of giants of Jotunheim, and the 2 powerful demigods who are responsible for guarding the palace on a daily basis. As the demigods fell one after another, Lauf became angry. After continuously investigating Jotunheim, Lauf finally had a rough idea of the location where Chen Luo appeared. Chen Luo set up a teleportation point within 100 miles, and Lauf personally stationed here to ensure that when Chen Luo appeared, he could find him as soon as possible. Therefore, the next time Chen Luo appeared at the teleportation area and wanted to continue hunting, he was immediately discovered by Lauf, who was waiting not far away. If Chen Luo hadn't retreated in time, he might have been left here forever. After realizing that Lauf was squatting aside, Chen Luo also gave up the idea of continuing to go to Jotunheim. Now if he wants to come again, I am afraid that he can only achieve it if he has the power to rival Su Fei. But even so, after killing 6 powerful demigods one after another and devouring them one after another, Chen Luo's blood god power has also been greatly improved. Compared with when he first became a demigod, his total divine power has increased. It has increased several times, which can be said to be a remarkable progress. Next, he only needs to successfully kill more than 90 demigods and swallow all their origins. Chen Luo's divine power can also successfully reach the level of the peak of demigods. At that time, he will be able to destroy a demigod, the power of the planet. But it obviously doesn't take quite a while to get to that point. After losing Jotunheim, the source of demigods, if he wants to further increase his divine power, He must find more demigods and hunt them. For this, Chen Luo has no idea now. What a clue. Therefore, with Chen Luo's current strength, it is obviously still somewhat difficult to complete the conditions given by the system. Just when Chen Luo had a headache, suddenly, he thought of something, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Wait, destroying a planet seems to be possible through other methods. At this time, Chen Luo also suddenly remembered that there is such a weapon in Asgard. Once this weapon is fully powerful, it can directly destroy a planet and turn it into dust in the universe. This weapon is the Bifrost controlled by the High family. In addition to being an artifact that allows people to teleport anywhere in the universe, Bifrost is also a weapon with huge amounts of power. When the power of Bifrost is turned on to the maximum, the power it releases will be able to directly penetrate into the star core of the planet and destroy it. As the star core is destroyed, the planet will also end with the collapse of the star core. Just disappear into the universe. Once the planet is destroyed, then life on the planet will naturally die out with the destruction of the planet. By then, the first step of the mission will be successfully completed. So as long as you go to Asgard and borrow a Bifrost, maybe you can. However, at this moment, as if sensing Chen Luo's thoughts, the system's voice sounded in his mind again. Ding! The blood sacrifice mission cannot be completed under the guise of external affairs. It can only be completed by the host himself. In addition, a planet that meets the conditions for blood sacrifice must meet the following conditions. There are 10 or more demigods on the planet. The total population of the planet is not less than 100 million people. Chen Luo was speechless when he heard the prompt from the system. Obviously, this restriction in the system was set up to prevent him from cheating. To complete this step, there was no other way but to rely on his own strength. And in order to prevent Chen Luo from deliberately looking for a sparsely populated planet, regulations were also made for the population of the planet. The conditions are only met if there are no less than 100 million people on the planet and there are more than 10 demigods. This can be said to have blocked Chen Luo's idea of cheating in all aspects. After understanding this, Chen Luo too sighed. It seems that only after I become a peak demigod can I have the opportunity to fulfill this condition. He understands the conditions for completing the road to becoming a god, but Chen Luo obviously has no idea how to proceed to the next step. If he wants to successfully complete the blood sacrifice, he can only wait until he reaches the peak level of demigod. So now he can keep waiting. While Chen Luo was thinking about this, on the other side, Hulk and 6'10" King Kong also got up from the bottom of the pit and came to Chen Luo. After coming back to his senses, Chen Luo raised his head, looked at Hulk and the others, smiled and said, "Okay, that's it for today. Let's all go back and rest." After waving to King Kong and saying goodbye, Chen Luo turned his head, looked at Hulk, and stretched out his right hand. "Come on, Hulk, let's go home." Just in time. Look at the time, Peter should be here too. It's time for you to go back and continue studying. Hearing this, Hulk's expression changed, and he immediately put down the hand he had just raised, turned around and ran away without thinking. Hulk hates studying. After saying that, Hulk jumped up, soaring into the sky in an instant, and jumped hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. Still want to run? Seeing Hulk's movements, Chen Luo's eyes flashed coldly, his mind moved, and the next moment, he disappeared in an instant. Immediately afterwards, Chen Luo appeared behind Hulk in an instant, pinched the other person's shoulder with one hand, and the two disappeared in the midst of Hulk's unwilling roar. Looking at where the two left, King Kong scratched his head, let out a soft roar, and then turned around and walked towards the base. On the other side, when Chen Luo had just brought Hulk to the room in the building, Peter had been waiting here for a long time. "Hulk, you're here. Let's start quickly." Seeing the smile on Peter's face, Hulk's voice faltered, and a touch of human bitterness appeared on his face. Chapter 367, Part 1. Soon, another few hours passed. "Okay, Hulk, you can stop." Inside the building room, Peter adjusted his glasses and said. As soon as he finished speaking, Hulk finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't worry, Hulk." At this time, Chen Luo said with a smile, "When you pass this exam, you will be truly free." Hearing this, Hulk's face suddenly tightened, and he looked at the test paper in his hand, his eyes filled with hope. After nearly 100 days of study, with the support of Banner's IQ, Hulk's learning progress has been rapid. Coupled with the agreement between Hulk and Banner, Hulk also understands that if he wants to gain true freedom, he can only find a way to separate from Banner. As for the way to separate between them, with the guarantee of Chen Luo, Hulk can only bite the bullet and continue learning. Although he didn't know what Chen Luo could do, Hulk trusted this friend very much, so he never had any doubts. After studying hard for hundreds of days, today it is finally time to accept the results. Peter stepped forward and took the test paper from Hulk's hand expressionlessly, then took out a red pen and silently revised it under Hulk's nervous gaze. When he saw Peter check a question, Hulk did not hide the joy on his face. But when he encountered the cross, Hulk's expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly showed frustration. "Color. Chen Luo on the side looked at his operation, which could be called a face-changing master, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, suppressing a smile, saying nothing, and waited silently. Time passed minute by minute, and although it was only less than 5 minutes in total, in Hulk's opinion, these 5 minutes, every second passed like a year, making him extremely tortured. But luckily it's all over now. As the paintbrush in Peter's hand stopped, he raised his head and looked at Hulk in front of him. Under the nervous gaze of the other party, finally, a smile slowly appeared on Peter's face. Congratulations, Hulk, you passed. With your current knowledge base, you have reached the level of an average high school student. So congratulations, Hulk, starting from today, you graduate. Roar. As soon as he finished speaking, Hulk roared excitedly. Hulk free. Seeing this fat man nearly 3 meters tall jumping around the room with an excited look on his face, if the floor in the room hadn't been made of extremely hard alloy, I'm afraid a big hole would have been dug out of the floor. At the same time, the moment Peter's voice fell, Chen Luo's mind also heard a prompt from the system again. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the mission. Hulk has successfully mastered university-level knowledge and now starts distributing rewards. The soul transfer device has been issued, and the host can withdraw it at any time. Hearing this voice, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, and thoughts began to swirl in his mind. First, Chen Luo immersed himself in the system space and began to check the introduction of the soul transfer device. Soul transfer device. Designate 2 targets to transfer their souls. Number of uses currently remaining. 3 now that the soul transfer device can be used at any time. The only thing left now is when Banner's research will be successful. According to Banner himself, he has now made some progress in the cloning project, with Chen Luo spending a lot of money and convening dozens of biological experts from around the world to conduct research. He has been able to the cloning and cultivation of some human cells have been initially achieved, and it probably won't take too long to achieve the final step. In this world, cloning technology is relatively complete. The reason why it has not been popularized on a large scale is due to ethical considerations, but these are no problems for Chen Luo Banner. After all, the reason why they are studying cloning technology is to prepare for the separation of Banner and Hulk. Even if they really develop mature cloning technology and are not ready to bring it to the market, they naturally do not need to consider such issues. After Hulk successfully graduated, Peter finally ended his short career as a teacher. It was gradually getting late at night. Just when he was about to go home and rest, Hulk, who was still looking excited, pulled him over. After playing games with Chen Luo all night, he finally couldn't hold on any longer. Early the next morning, I fell asleep deeply on Hulk's big bed. The next week, after his study career finally ended, Chen Luo also gave him a good vacation. It happened that in the past 3 months, the relationship between Hulk and King Kong had become closer, so Chen Luo simply let Hulk throw it over there and let him play with King Kong. Definitely, this is only at night. During the day, Chen Luo will take Hulk back and Banner will take over the body to continue research on the cloning project. On this day, Chen Luo had just brought Banner back. As soon as he got home, the next moment, Peter's anxious voice sounded. Chen, come and take a look. Huh? What's the matter? When they came to the living room, they saw Peter pointing to the TV in front of him with an anxious look on his face and said, Chen, look, Uncle Tony. Hearing the name, Chen Luo frowned slightly and immediately turned to look in the direction of the TV. I saw that a massive live broadcast was being broadcast on the TV at this moment. The live broadcast scene is currently in the capital of Yingjiang, in a conference room of huge amounts. But what was different from the past was that this meeting was really attended by a lot of people. Major domestic media outlets sent people there one after another. The venue was crowded with people, all looking at the figure sitting quietly at the front with a faint smile on his face, full of nervousness and expectation. Tony Stark. At this time, in the middle of the row of seats in front of Tony, on a table with a sign saying the Minister of Defense, a smart and capable man in a black suit was asking Tony, Mr. Stark, do you have any special weapons? No, I definitely didn't. Tony denied. There's none? That depends on how you define battlesuit. Tony shrugged, looking relaxed. Iron Man battlesuit. That's not the right thing to say. Oh, how should I describe it appropriately? The man twitched the corner of his mouth, and a light flashed in his eyes. To be honest, it's a high-tech prosthetic limb. As soon as he finished speaking, Iwa burst into laughter in the audience. No, Mr. Stark, this is a weapon. The man looked solemn and said seriously, and my current job is to hand over this steel battle suit, from Noma, to the people of the Eagle Country. Listening to the pictures on the TV, Peter couldn't help but have a trace of worry on his face. Chun, Uncle Tony. Seeing Peter hesitate to speak, Chen Luo smiled slightly and comforted. Don't worry, this is just a small scene. Tony will handle it well. There are many people who want his skills, but you have to have confidence in him. As long as he doesn't want to, no one can force him to do anything. After all, he's Iron Man, isn't he? Hearing this, Peter was stunned for a moment, then nodded heavily. I see. Then, as expected, under Tony's sharp words, the last grand hearing ended in an anticlimactic manner. Even though he was facing the country's top officials, Tony did not show any fear and walked out of it unscathed. Looking at this scene, Chen Luo was not surprised, but such a familiar scene also instantly brought back some other memories for him. Chapter 368, Part 1. If he remembers it correctly, after this meeting, the man who also mastered the design of the small arc reactor will come here to seek revenge from Tony. Definitely, Chen Luo was non-committal about the hatred between this man and Tony. If his memory is correct, the hatred between the two comes from the grudge between their parents. When he participated in the research of the arc reactor, Ivan's father was kicked out by Tony's father for secretly selling relevant information. He left the team and spent the rest of his life in the northern Bear Country. For the poor life between their father and son, Ivan blamed all of it on Tony. Especially after learning that Tony had become Iron Man, his dissatisfaction and resentment reached in order to avenge Tony. Ivan, who inherited all the knowledge from his father, just like Tony, completed the small arc reactor on his own, and used the energy of the reactor to create powerful weapons to avenge Tony. The supervillain, Whiplash, was born. And if he remembered correctly, the other party should appear soon. 997. It's time to go over and have a look. Calculating the time, it has been almost 4 months since Tony was poisoned by palladium, and until now, there has been no good news from Tony. Obviously, after such a long time, Tony still has not found out the condition of his body. Corresponding solution. If this continues, Tony's life will gradually come to an end. Chen Luo naturally had a corresponding solution to Tony's situation. Not to mention converting him into the Blood Clan. The legacy his father left him was enough to help Tony solve his current predicament. As long as he finds this legacy, Tony will not only be able to quickly return to normal, he can even find a brand new element and apply this element to the arc reactor, then he will get a more powerful energy source. With the support of this energy source, Tony can also develop more powerful steel armor. Just like the Bloody Edge armor developed by Tony in the future, it is completed by relying on this energy source. Its importance is evident. It is precisely because he understands the importance of this element to Tony that Chen Luo prefers to let Tony solve his own problems. After all, he does not have a brain like Tony. Even if Howard's sandbox is placed in front of him, there are no new elements hidden in it. So the only thing he can do for his friend now is to help him take this sandbox with new elements hidden from Fury's hands, and leave the rest to Fury himself. After thinking this, Chen Luo didn't hesitate too much. He took out his mobile phone and started to contact Fury. List? On the other end of the phone, Sui Rue's somewhat confused voice came. Fury, I need your help with something here. Chen Luo had no intention of being polite to the other party and immediately stated his request. Do you have anything related to Tony there? For example, did his father leave any relics? After hearing Chen Luo's words, Fury was silent for a moment and then answered. I have some things left by Howard here. He is Tony's father and the founder of our shield, so after his death, everything he left in Curry has been sealed by us. The reason why Fury told Chen Luo all this truthfully was because of Phil Coulson's report to Fury after he returned from Thor a few months ago. After contacting Thor, Fury suddenly became wary of the fact that there was such a powerful race in the universe. For such a powerful race in the universe, the current power of the Earth is undoubtedly far from enough to fight against it. Nowadays, the only high-end combat power on the Earth that can compete with the strong opponent is Chen Luo. And the most important thing is that the strongest combat power on the Earth is still standing with them. On this side, Fury naturally has to support Chen Luo as much as possible. In the previous operations, Chen Luo came to support them and how much he helped them. Even if it was to repay Chen Luo for the help he had given them several times before, this time, he had no reason to refuse. After hearing Fury's answer, Chen Luo said without thinking, Where are those things? Take me there and have a look. It's right at the headquarters base. You can come over at any time and I'll take you there. After confirming it, Chen Luo immediately threw it towards S.H.I.E.L.D. Meanwhile, on the other side, just after leaving the meeting, Tony came to a racing track without stopping. Perhaps as time went by, the signs of palladium poisoning in his body became more and more intense, but he still had not found a solution. Therefore, the pressure in Tony's heart became more and more intense, and it was not enough to vent. Surprising. So, with the idea of looking for excitement, Tony came here, got into a racing car on the field, and started competing with other drivers. Boom! Accompanied by the violent roar of engines, more than a dozen racing cars drove forward in unison. In an instant, smoke and dust filled the field, and cheers like a tsunami filled the entire venue. Tony, come on. You can definitely win. Iron Man, you are the best. Amid the cheers of thousands of people outside the stadium, Tony drove the car at high speed on the field. But at this moment, in the auditorium around the stadium, a tall man with gray hair and beard who looked like an Eastern European suddenly stood up from the auditorium, crossed the railing in front of him, and strode towards the arena. Go to the center. Ignoring countless pairs of doubtful eyes outside the court, Ivan took off his shirt and threw it aside. Immediately afterwards, a pair of huge amounts of steel whips stretched out from both hands, and a small ring-shaped device lit up on the chest. Huge amounts of energy surged out from it, flowing through the two long whips at the hands. Zitzy. A violent electric current sounded, and two blue electric currents were wrapped around the surface of the two long whips. With just a random swing, the ground instantly turned black and was thrown out of two deep ravines. Seeing this scene, the venue suddenly fell into silence. Chapter 369, Part 1. In the spacious arena, after a brief silence, bursts of noise suddenly sounded. Who is this man? Why is he on the field? I don't know, but he looks like he's looking for trouble with someone. Looking for trouble? Someone suddenly looked surprised. Doesn't he know that there is the famous Iron Man on the field now? Where did he get the courage? Not necessarily. Someone looked at Ivan's outfit on the field and seemed to think of something, and suddenly his face was startled. Maybe he is just here to cause trouble for Tony? Look at his outfit. He looks a little bad. You look like you're provoking. And look at the device on that guy's chest. Why does it look familiar to me? While everyone was talking about it, in the center of the arena, the staff also saw Ivan in the arena. Their expressions changed, and they all planned to step forward and pull him back into the audience. Boom. However, before they could take action, the next moment, Ivan looked solemn and looked at the oncoming racing car ahead with a murderous look. He waved the long whip in his hand without any hesitation, and the sound of electric current sounded in the air. Swing forward heavily. The long whip, wrapped in electric current, swung forward. Under the shocked gaze of everyone, it instantly cut across the car body, like a hot knife cutting through butter, without a trace of resistance, cutting the car in front of it in half. The car body instantly split into two halves. Seeing that the two strips in the middle of the car body were eroded by the high temperature of the electric current, red traces of hot molten iron continued to flow downwards. After a moment of silence, the whole place was followed by constant screams. *T. This guy is definitely here to trouble Tony Stark. Let's go. Where's Tony? Where is he now? Damn it. He's still racing in the car. Without that steel armor, how could he be this guy's opponent? Then what should we do? Are we just going to watch Tony fall into this guy's hands? Don't worry about them. Let's leave quickly. Otherwise, we may not be able to leave. Amidst the screams, the audience seats around the stadium suddenly became chaotic. The audience got up and fled, and there was no intention to continue watching the game. Happy was also watching all this in the audience. Looking at the figure on the field holding a whip and waving it, Happy looked anxious and his eyes were full of worry. Tony, that's right. At this time, Happy seemed to suddenly remember something, turned around immediately, and ran out of the venue without looking back. Just as Happy left, on the other side, on the playing field, Tony was driving the car and stepped on the accelerator. As he was driving at full speed in the arena, the next moment, the sound of a road coming from the front suddenly attracted his attention. What's the situation? Subconsciously, Tony turned his head to look, but when Tony saw the situation in front of him, his expression suddenly changed. He saw dozens of meters in front of him, where Ivan was standing, that there were several racing cars lying around in a mess. The car body was divided into two halves. As the car body engine was ignited by the electric current attached to the whip, accompanied by violent explosions, several huge amounts of fireballs were scattered in the center of the track, firmly blocking other vehicles here. No progress at all. Seeing this, Tony's pupil shrank subconsciously, and he stepped on the brakes without thinking. As the steering wheel turned, the vehicle drew several long arcs on the track, then rolled uncontrollably several times and fell upside down. Center of the track. Boom. Along with a dull sound, a line of black smoke rose from the car body, and then, a flame suddenly began to burn in the engine area of the vehicle. The flames billowed, and countless parts on the car body exploded, making sharp sounds. The flames quickly spread across the car body, and as the temperature inside the car increased rapidly, Tony, who was still in a dazed state, was suddenly awakened. Upon noticing this, Tony's expression changed, and he struggled to climb out of the car window without thinking, and then turned to the side. Run. Boom. Huge amounts of explosions struck, and the car instantly turned into a ball of fire. Thick smoke rose up, completely wrapping and swallowing the entire car body. Tony Stark. Seeing Tony running out of the car, Ivan twitched the corner of his mouth, dragged the whip in his hand, and walked in the direction of Tony. You have to pay for what your father did. Now, it's time for me to take revenge on you. Revenge? Hearing this, Tony turned his head subconsciously and looked at Ivan, who was walking towards him. His brain was running rapidly, but after thinking carefully for a long time, he still had no impression of the figure in front of him. Who are you? I don't remember where I've seen you before. Don't think about it. Ivan sneered, swinging the whip gently in his hand, leaving a long scorch mark on the ground, which made Toulouse's eyes twitch slightly. Please give me flowers. We have never met before, but you should be familiar with this." As he said that, Ivan lowered his head and looked at his chest, following the other person's gaze. When Tony saw the familiar device on the other person's chest, the next moment, Tony's face suddenly became stiff. "This is arc reactor. How come you have this?" As if he thought of something, Tony's face turned extremely ugly. He stared at the other person and said word by word, "Damn thief, tell me, where did you get the technology from?" Ivan was stunned for a moment, then laughed loudly, with a mocking expression on his face, and said disdainfully, "Thief? Are you telling the contrary? If you want to say who is the real thief, only your father is the real thief. If it weren't for him, arc reactor technology would have been my father's research and development achievement. Now is the time for me to ask you for everything for my father." Listening to Ivan's words, Tony frowned. "What do you mean? Do you think the reactor is your father's invention?" "That's right. My father was involved in the research and development of the reactor back then. If Howard hadn't kicked my father out of the team at the moment it was about to be completed, how could he have monopolized this technology? Today, I want to show everyone that the arc reactor is not just a technology unique to the Stark Group, and my skills are the best proof." After the words fell, Ivan didn't say any more nonsense to Tony and quickly swung the whip forward in his hand. Seeing this, Tony's expression changed and he quickly dodged away. "Tony!" Just when Tony was running away in a panic, Happy's voice finally sounded again. He hurried back to the auditorium and threw the suitcase he had just taken out of the car forward. Tony turned his head subconsciously, saw Happy's movements, his eyes flashed, his spirit perked up, and he quickly reached out to take the suitcase. Turning around, Tony had now regained his confidence. "It's all over. No matter what you have to say, you can keep it until you say it in prison." As soon as he finished speaking, Tony immediately took action. Chapter 370, Part 1. Quickly put the suitcase on the ground, press it with both hands, and then lift it up sharply. Click. Accompanied by the sound of metal, the suitcase changed its shape instantly, and two steel gloves stretched out from it, and then wrapped Tony's hands in it. Immediately afterwards, Tony pulled hard with both hands, and a set of gold and red steel armor stretched out from the suitcase, and then covered the body behind the button. As countless pieces of steel armor were clasped together, Tony's body was quickly wrapped in the armor. The moment the helmet covered his head, a bright light flashed, instantly illuminating Tony's vision. "Mr. Stark. JRVIS." Hearing this voice, Tony was determined, and a confident smile appeared on his face again. He looked at Ivan's figure in front of him, and he was already sure of victory. Then, now is the time to solve the problem. Lifting his head and looking forward, Tony smiled confidently and spoke softly. 097. It only took less than 5 minutes, and with an absolute technical advantage, Tony successfully defeated Ivan and completely lost his ability to fight. He reached out towards the other person's chest and took out the arc reactor from his chest. Looking at the reactor in his hand, Tony's eyes flashed. Without saying anything, he asked Happy to send the person to prison. After that, Tony rose into the sky and headed towards Fly Far Away. Half an hour later, Tony's home. Tony drove the armor across the sky, then landed on top and slowly fell downwards. Back in the underground studio, Tony stepped out of the suit, put the reactor in his hand on the table, and then began to give instructions. JRVIS, did you find out the information about the person just now? Ivan, the son of former polar bear scientist Anton Fanko, was also a colleague of Mr. Howard. Using the information collection ability of JRVIS, within a few seconds after hearing Tony's instructions, the information about Ivan had been found. After hearing the information from JRVIS, Tony finally had information about Ivan's origin. Some understanding. So, his father was really a colleague of my father back then? What about Arc Reactor? How did that Anton get proposed to the team? Sir, I couldn't find any information about this on the internet. Is this so? Tony touched his chin and said thoughtfully, by the way, if I remember correctly, didn't Fury tell his father that he used to work at SHILD? Regarding this information, will there be corresponding records at SHILD? Thinking of this, Tony suddenly made a decision in his mind. JRVIS, contact me. Before he finished speaking, the next moment, Tony's face changed. His eyes suddenly began to shrink. His right hand tightly covered his chest, his face turned pale, and he clenched his teeth. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. After a while, when the trembling gradually disappeared, Tony finally calmed down, breathed a long sigh of relief, and relaxed his tightened brows slightly. Sir, the vegetable juice you need to drink today is ready. I see, Tony replied weakly, lifting his shirt and looking at the countless green and black veins on his chest that were like spider webs all over his body. Tony's eyes instantly became a little darker, and his heart felt a little dull. Now more than 3 months have passed since he found out that he was poisoned by palladium. Originally, He was confident that it would not be difficult to find a solution with his own wisdom during this period. But he didn't expect that it would be so difficult in practice. Not to mention finding any solution. In the past hundreds of days, he has not even thought of a feasible solution. No matter how much information he has read and how long he has been immersed in research in the studio, he still has no idea about himself. The situation is completely helpless, and we can only watch the toxin spread day by day. Until now, under the detection of JRVIS, the palladium content in his body has reached 70%, and he is only one step away from the final 100% fatality rate. According to his calculations, if he still can't find a solution within a week, then he will have the last option left. That is to get rid of Chen Luo and officially transform him into a vampire. Only in this way can he gain a new life. If there is really no other way, I can only go to Chen for help. With a heavy sigh, Tony dragged his somewhat heavy body out of the studio and walked upstairs. As soon as he arrived in the living room, walked into the kitchen, and picked up the vegetable juice that had been prepared, Tony frowned, held his breath, and drank it all in one gulp. Feeling the indescribable taste in his mouth, the next moment, Tony put on a mask of pain. Tony, well, what's wrong with you? Suddenly, with waves of shaking in the air, Chen Luo appeared in the living room. Seeing the pain on Tony's face, he couldn't help but ask curiously, "List?" Hearing this voice, Tony turned his head subconsciously. When he saw Chen Luo appearing here, Tony was startled for a moment, then quickly stepped forward and came to Chen Luo. "You came just in time. I just need your help." "Oh." Chen Luo looked Tony up and down, and said thoughtfully, "Have you decided that you want me to transform you?" Tony nodded helplessly, his face full of bitterness. "There is no other way. I have looked for all the ways I can think of during this period, but I still haven't found a solution. It seems that I thought too simply before. Look." As he spoke, Tony opened his shirt, revealing the blue-black veins all over his chest, and said with some despair, "Now the concentration of palladium in my body has almost reached its peak. At this rate, if the speed continues, I'm afraid I'll be dead in less than a week." "So, you don't mind becoming a vampire?" "It's meaningless to care now." Tony sighed. "I don't want to leave this world right now. Even if the price is becoming a vampire, I can only choose to accept it. Not always." Chen Luo smiled and shook his head. "By the way, wait for me here now. I have something to give you." With that said, Chen Luo disappeared instantly. When he reappeared, there was already a lot of items in his hands. "These are all things that your father left behind its shield. By the way, there is also this videotape, which Fury specially asked me to bring to you." With that said, Chen Luo handed over the videotape in his hand. "Wait until you finish watching this and then decide whether or not you want to be transformed by me. Maybe what you're looking for is right here." After taking the videotape, Tony looked at the pile of items brought behind Chen Luo 2.2 with a complicated expression. "Something from my father?" After a moment of silence, Tony finally nodded slightly and said, "I see. Then I'll leave this place to you." Chen Luo nodded and was about to leave. "Wait a minute." At this time, Tony suddenly stopped him and said with a serious face, "Chun, please stay and look with me. If you can't find a solution here, you don't have to make an extra trip." "Got it." After spending so long with Chen Luo, Tony has built up a deep trust in Chen Luo, so naturally he will not shy away from him, even if it is a videotape left by his father. Tony didn't bother to share with Chen Luo at all. Hearing this, Chen Luo thought about it and did not refuse. The two of them started watching the video together in the living room. Soon, with the machine running, the pictures on the screen gradually appeared in front of the two people. Chapter 371, Part 1. As the picture on the screen turned, gradually, a familiar figure emerged from the screen. On the screen, a tall and slender man wearing an expensive suit could be seen. Although he looked a bit older, he could still see the handsome man in his youth, pushing open the door and coming to the center of the screen. This man's face looked somewhat similar to Tony's, especially the small mustache on the upper edge of his lips, which is exactly the same as Tony's now. He looks like Tony in old age. The man on the screen is none other than Tony's biological father, Howard Stark. Technology can achieve anything. Howard opened his arms and said to the screen, "A better life, a stronger body, and, for the first time in human history, the possibility of world peace. I'm Howard Stark, and everything you need in the future can be found here. The city of the future, the city of tomorrow, or everything you can imagine." I saw Howard surrounding a huge amount of city model, passionately introducing his idea to the world. "So, on behalf of everyone at Stark Industries, I want to..." While speaking, suddenly, a young figure appeared from under the model. Noticing this, Howard paused, and then said with a serious face, "Tony, what are you doing here? What are you holding in your hand? Put it back." After asking Tony to be taken away, Howard went through the process again. "Then let's move on. On behalf of everyone at Stark Industries." After a period of meaningless prospecting, finally, When Tony were getting impatient, Howard made another move. Tony. Leaning in front of the model, Howard's face became more serious than ever before. He looked forward and slowly said, "You are still young and cannot understand what I mean yet. So I'd better record it and show it to you." Pointing to the model behind him, a hint of pride flashed across Howard's face. "I designed this for you. One day, you will understand that this is far more than just an invention. This is my life's work. This is the key to the future. I'm limited by the technology of my time, so I can't go any further. But you are different. Tony, I believe if it were you, you would figure it out one day. By then, you will be able to change the world. In my life, from beginning to end, the greatest creation is you." As the screen in front of him gradually dimmed, at this moment, the room suddenly fell into silence for a moment. Chen Luo turned his head and looked at Tony's appearance at this moment. He was sitting there with a complicated expression on his face, motionless. His eyes were blank, as if he had been caught in some kind of memory, and he had not spoken for a long time. Finally, when Tony came to his senses, he heard a long sigh. "What, Tony, did you find out?" "No." Tony shook his head, his eyes full of complexity. "I just didn't expect that my father would think so highly of me. It turns out that I thought he was just a workaholic who focused on his work and never put himself in my care. I even thought he had never liked me." Speaking of this, Tony seemed to be lost in memories again, with loneliness written on his face. "Don't think like that." Looking at the look on Tony's face at this moment, Chen Luo gently patted his shoulder and comforted. "You are a real genius. I don't think your father can't see the potential in you. The reason why he will be strict with you is because he has greater hope for you. He believes in you, and you will definitely be able to change the world in the future." Hearing Chen Luo's words, Tony was refreshed and suddenly regained consciousness. "Chen, you are right." Turning his head, Tony smiled confidently and said, "I am a man who can change the world. I will prove to my father that he is not wrong about me." Chen Luo nodded, and then said, "So, do you have a way to solve your problem now?" Forehead. Tony's face froze and he was speechless. Seeing this, Chen Luo was embarrassed to watch him continue to suffer, so he simply asked, "By the way, when I saw your father talking just now, wasn't there always that model behind him? Maybe the method he provided was based on that model. Just in time. I think I brought that model over too. Let's take a look at it together." Hearing this, Tony thought for a moment and nodded slightly. "Okay, let's take a look together." With that said, the two of them walked towards the pile of debris that Chen Luo brought back just now. Among them, that model had the largest area, so it attracted the attention of the two people immediately. Tony raised his head, looked straight at the model in front of him, and observed it carefully. After carefully searching for a while, he finally seemed to have discovered something. A light flashed in his eyes, and an excited smile suddenly appeared on his face. "Wait, I think I discovered something?" After saying this, Tony quickly turned to look at Chen Luo. "Chen, please take this model to the basement. I need to scan it." "Simple." Chen Luo nodded, and his divine power instantly spread from his body, wrapping around Tony and the model. He snapped his fingers, and the next moment, the two of them appeared in the basement. Placing the model behind him on the workbench, Tony said hurriedly, "JRVIS, make me a digital structural wireframe. I need a working projection." "Yes, sir." The next moment, a blue light suddenly appeared on the stage, shrouded above, and slowly swept across the entire model. As the blue light swept across, above the model, buildings composed of projections began to be slowly constructed. After a while, all the buildings on this model were reproduced 10 to 10,467 times more beautifully. 1974 Stark Expo model scan complete, sir. Hearing this, Tony didn't waste any time. He stretched out his hand to hold up the virtual model projection in front of him and asked while operating it, "How many buildings are there in total? Counting the Belgian waffle stand?" "You are asking questions knowingly and show it all." As he spoke, the projection in front of him changed again. As the projection slowly stood up, Tony looked at it carefully for a moment and said without looking back, "What do you think this looks like, Chen?" "I don't know." Chen Luo rolled his eyes, found a chair and sat down, quietly watching his operations. Tony didn't seem surprised at all by Chen Luo's answer, shrugged, and then started his operation again. "This model looks quite like an atom. If so, then the nucleus is here. Delete sidewalks, delete landscaping, shrubbery, and trees, parking lots, entrances and exits. Using the exhibition hall as a framework to construct protons and neutrons." As Tony's words fell, gradually, the originally huge and complicated model began to be quickly streamlined, and finally turned into a blue spherical light spot. Although it looked unremarkable, Tony's face gradually became excited when he saw this brand new projection in front of him. "This is it. This is it. Found it. New elements." Chapter 372, Part 1. With a wave of his hands, the spherical light spot in front of him quickly expanded. Standing inside the light spot, looking at the expanded internal structure of the projection in front of him, Tony shook his head and slightly raised the corner of his mouth. I didn't expect that you have been dead for almost 20 years, and now you have taught me a lesson. I really do have you, Dad. The light spot shrank rapidly, and then shrank into a ball. Tony held it in the palm of his hand and carefully looked at the projection in his hand. A look of hope gradually rose in Tony's eyes. Sir, this new element should be a substitute for palladium, but unfortunately, this element cannot be synthesized artificially. Yeah. Hearing this, Tony smiled confidently, turned his head and looked at Chen Luo behind him. Chun, can you help me? You have the final say. Chen Luo shrugged, with no intention of refusing. Subsequently, under Tony's command, Chen Luo also began to help him manually build the devices needed to prepare new elements. With the addition of Chen Luo, Tony successfully completed the new device in just half an hour. But it doesn't come without a cost. At the very least, his current studio was demolished to pieces due to Chen Luo's violent dismantling. Restoring it to its original state is obviously not a small project. But this is obviously not a problem for Tony, who is worth billions. Looking at the brand new equipment in front of him, Tony rubbed his palms excitedly, looking a little impatient. Treat. Then let's get started. Chen Luo nodded, with a hint of expectation flashing in his eyes. Okay. I also want to see if your new element is useful. Then, when Tony was about to start preparing new elements, suddenly, Chen Luo's face moved slightly, as if he sensed something, and he raised his eyebrows in confusion. Tony, someone is coming upstairs. It looks like I'm here to find you. Why? Do you want to meet me? No. Tony, who was busy preparing new elements, had no intention of going out and said without raising his head, Chun, please go take a look for me. If it's Pepper coming, let her wait first. If it's anyone else, let them leave first. Then keep busy. I'll go out and take a look. Chen Luo also knew that this was a critical moment for Tony. He didn't want to see other people disturbing his good friend. He just had nothing to do now, so he didn't refuse and turned around and walked upstairs. When he came to the living room and saw the person coming, Chen Luo's eyes suddenly lit up. What I saw walking in from the door of Tony's house was a beautiful girl with a curvy figure and long red wavy hair. She was wearing a women's professional suit, and the shirt on her upper body perfectly highlighted her body curves. The black stockings on her upper and lower body added a different kind of charm to her. Regardless of appearance or figure, even from Chen Luo's perspective, she is the best Chen Luo has ever seen, not inferior to Qin, Serena, and others. This guy, Tony, has a girlfriend called Pepper, and he even hides such a beautiful woman. Thinking of Tony, who was still working hard below, Chen Luo couldn't help but complain. You big-browed guy. I don't know who kept saying before that after you have Pepper, you won't look for anyone else, but now? The real owner has come to visit. Since the other party already knows the address of Tony's home, it is obvious that the relationship between the other party and Tony will not be simple. Coupled with the other party's good looks, Chen Luo would not believe it if there was no other relationship between Tony and her. Hello, Natasha Romanoff. Seeing Chen Luo appearing in the living room, Natasha Romanoff's eyes flashed, and then she stretched out her right hand with a calm expression and shook it with Chen Luo. Well, Natasha Romanoff. Looking at the other person's appearance, especially after hearing the other person's name, Chen Luo reacted instantly, realized something, and silently retracted his previous thoughts. Chen Luo chuckled lightly and Taguchi said, Chen Luo? I'm boss's new secretary. Natasha Romanoff replied calmly. Really? Chen Luo's lips curved slightly. He looked at the other person up and down and said calmly, but why do I feel like Miss Natasha Romanoff is not an ordinary person? At least in terms of physical fitness, you are far better than the average person. Huh. Natasha Romanoff's heart skipped a beat, but her smile didn't change at all. I don't understand what you mean, sir. Looking at Natasha Romanoff, who was starting to act stupid, Chen Luo smiled and said nothing nonsense. With a thought, a stream of blood emerged from his body. Before the other party could react, he quickly wrapped around the other party and firmly controlled him in place. It looks like Miss Natasha Romanoff is not going to tell the truth. But it doesn't matter, you don't need to ask, I will understand later. It's just that we still need Miss Natasha Romanoff's cooperation. As he said that, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with purple light, and he immediately planned to take action. Wait a moment. Seeing Chen Luo's actions, Natasha Romanoff's expression changed. She couldn't help it anymore and opened her mouth to block the right path. Looking at Chen Luo, Natasha Romanoff said seriously, Mr. Chen Luo, to tell you the truth, I am an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. There is no hostile relationship between us. I don't think Mr. Chen Luo has any reason to attack me. S.H.I.E.L.D.? Chen Luo's face remained unchanged as he asked, then can you tell me the reason why you want to get close to Tony? Boss, approaching Tony is an order from director Nick Fury. Facing Chen Luo, Natasha Romanoff did not dare to hide it and explained, a week ago, The director discovered something abnormal about Tony, so he specially sent me to go there. Come investigate. Having said this, Natasha Romanoff paused and then continued. I don't have any ill intentions in approaching Tony. The director asked me to help. Help? Chen Luo was noncommittal. Then do you know what's wrong with Tony now? I'm not sure either. Natasha Romanoff thought for a while and said, but based on my observations, I think Tony is probably poisoned, so I'm coming here now just for further confirmation. If he is really poisoned, I think the director should be able to provide some help. After hearing the other party's explanation, Chen Luo nodded slightly, without saying anything else, and waved his hand to untie the other party's body. Okay, you can leave. As for your identity, I will confirm it with Fury later. As for the rest, you don't need to worry about anything else. I will help Tony take care of it. Hearing Chen Luo's eviction order, Natasha Romanoff didn't express any objection, nodded, turned, and walked towards the door. Watching the other party's leaving figure, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with light. He paused, then turned and walked towards the basement. As soon as he came back, Tony's excited voice sounded in front of Chen Luo. Success. Chapter 373, Part 1. Chen, I succeeded. Tony turned his head and looked behind him where Chen Luo was, his face full of excitement. He held an iron tong in his right hand, and in the center of the iron tong was a small triangle shining with azure light. From this small triangle, Chen Luo could clearly feel that huge amounts of energy fluctuations were emerging from it. It's so vast, it seems endless. Looks good. Chen Luo nodded and asked with interest, how's it going? Does your new element have a name? Name? Tony's face froze, and his excitement gradually subsided. He thought for a while and then said, I haven't thought of it yet. How about you help me pick one? After all, you also contributed to this element, and you are also responsible for its birth. Chen Luo blinked and looked at the shining thing in Tony's hand. His eyes flashed as if he thought of something, and he said thoughtfully, I just thought of one. Infinite elements. What do you think of this name? Infinite elements? Tony was stunned, thought for a while, and then nodded vigorously. Sounds good. Then use this. Putting the new element in his hand into the prepared reactor device, Tony rubbed his hands excitedly, his face full of anticipation. Then it's time for some practical testing. Hopefully this element will work properly in the reactor. Don't worry, it will definitely work. Chen Luo stepped forward, looked at the increasingly dazzling blue light inside the reactor 130, and said confidently, with this, your situation should be able to be solved. Hope so. Just as the two were communicating, a dazzling bright light flashed. Then, as the light became restrained, when Tony regained his sight again, what appeared in front of him was a small arc reactor that had started to operate again. Sir, after testing, the reactor is running fine. A moment later, the voice of JRVIS sounded. Hearing the analysis from JRVIS, Tony's face became increasingly happy. Looking at the reactor in front of him, a glimmer of hope ignited in his eyes again. Next, we have to see if this new element can solve my problem. Taking a deep breath, Tony took the reactor in front of him in his hand, and then Chen Luo helped him remove the old reactor from his chest. Then, as soon as the reactor was removed, Tony quickly pressed the reactor in his hand. Click. As the new reactor was embedded in Tony's chest, the next moment, the light inside the reactor began to become more and more dazzling, and then turned into a dazzling light ball that enveloped Tony's entire body. Although it was obscured by the light, Chen Luo, Xia, could still clearly see that as the light spread throughout his body, the countless green and black veins on Tony's chest were fading at a speed visible to the naked eye, and gradually returned to their original shape. Appearance. As the light dissipated, Tony took a long breath, his face looking more relaxed than ever. This feels really good. Lowering his head, clenching his fists, feeling the constant energy flowing from his body at this moment, Tony raised the corner of his mouth and smiled with satisfaction. Why? It seems like you have recovered. That's definitely. Tony raised his fist and waved it twice in a decent manner. The punch was strong and powerful. There is no doubt that his body has returned to its peak condition now. Now I have not only solved the problem of palladium poisoning, but with the blessing of infinite elements, I feel that my energy has also increased a lot. Even compared with me when I was young, it is much better. It seems that the effect of the new elements is even better than I imagined. Speaking of this, Tony seemed to have thought of something and raised his head excitedly. JRVIS, check my current physical condition. Yes, sir. A blue light curtain suddenly swept across Tony's body. As the light dissipated, a moment later, the voice of JRVIS sounded again. Sir, after testing, your body has fully recovered. No other problems occurred? Not detected yet. Sir, is that so? Tony nodded. Since no problem could be detected for the time being, Tony didn't care too much. He turned his head and looked at the exhibition cabinet containing steel armor not far away, his eyes full of expectation. Color. Then, It's time to try out how much the new reactor can improve the performance of the armor. With that said, Tony immediately planned to step forward to conduct a test. That's right. Tony turned around and looked at Chen Luo. Do you want to come and take a look? Just in time. We can have another round of competition. If anyone loses, then the bet will be the same as last time. How about it? Oh. Hearing this, Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and said with interest, Why? It seems you are still not convinced. In this case, let's compare. But this time the bet is doubled. If we lose, it will have to last for a month. What? Tony was startled. His expression changed. He gritted his teeth and nodded in agreement. You guy, don't think you are sure to win. This time, I may not lose. Then it's decided. Seeing this, Chen Luo didn't say anything more. He nodded and walked out. I'll wait for you outside. As he said this, Chen Luo had a thought in his mind, and then slowly disappeared from the spot. Chen, you guy, just wait for me. This time, I will win. Lowering his head and looking at the dazzling blue light on his chest, Tony made up his mind and walked forward confidently, while Chen Luo and Tony were competing on the other side. In a high-security prison, in the warden's office, a guest suddenly came to visit today. Then, it's settled, Mr. Jack? Absolutely no problem. Mr. Hammer. Standing up, Jack smiled in front of him somewhat flatteringly, his expression full of respect. But this is normal. Although as the warden, he can be said to have all the influence in this prison, for Hammer, as the helmsman of Hammer Industries with a market value of hundreds of billions, his status is completely worthless. Carry. Due to Hammer's status, there is no possibility of intersection between them on weekdays. The reason why they meet here now is because Hammer suddenly received a message today. In order to prevent any accidents, he hurried here. Just a few hours ago, he had just received news that the person who attacked Tony actually had an arc reactor similar to Tony's on his chest. After receiving this news, he knew the value of the reactor and did not dare to pause even for a moment. Get up and go to where Ivan is being held, intending to rescue him. If he can be brought to his company and have the other party's technology, then his company will truly have hope of surpassing Stark Industries. Therefore, in order to obtain the talent of Ivan as soon as possible, Hammer also paid a considerable price, and the group finally achieved its goal. After receiving a positive reply from the warden, Hammer acted quickly and immediately sent someone to take Ivan out of the prison. He returned to the headquarters without stopping. Hammer immediately planned to meet this talented person who could develop the arc reactor on his own. Chapter 374, Part 1. You're finally here. Welcome. Hammer walked forward with enthusiasm, looked at the guards on both sides of Ivan, and said, Please untie his handcuffs, thank you. Mr. Ivan is not in action. He is a human being. He deserves the right to freedom. But sir, he is very dangerous. After hearing this, a person next to Ivan changed his face slightly and warned, Don't worry. Hammer raised his right hand, looking confident. I can handle it. Seeing Hammer's unquestionable look, the other party didn't say anything more, silently opened the handcuffs on Ivan's hands, and then silently retreated. Forgive me, I'm your biggest fan. After untying the handcuffs, Hammer reached out his hand with enthusiasm and held it tightly with the other person. My name is Justin Hammer. Mr. Ivan, I want to do some business with you. I also know something about your situation, Mr. Ivan. I think you also want to kill Tony Stark, right? When I saw you attacking him at the racing track, you stood in front of him like a god descending. That scene was simply... Shaking his head, Hammer kept praising him. You sent me a message, so I think our goal should be the same, isn't it? It's precisely because of this that I won't just watch them let you stay in prison for the rest of your life. I need your talents. Hammer shrugged and spoke his mind. You should have tried it before. Your strength alone is not enough to deal with Iron Man, so I think you need my help. Listen to me, don't think about killing him right now. Let me tell you, we should find a way to take away his achievements now. We should make him lose nothing. As soon as these words came out, Ivan's originally casual expression suddenly changed, and he became slightly serious. He looked directly at the other person, waiting for his next words. Seeing this, Hammer was overjoyed and said quickly, Look, you have talents that I don't have, and I have resources that you don't have. We can work together. I will provide you with the resources you want, and you help me build the weapon I want. As long as we take everything away from Tony Stark together, then, no matter how you want to deal with him, I can do my best to help you realize your wish. So, if you want to kill him, then you need my resources and let me be your backer and your sponsor. What do you think of my proposal? After hearing Hammer's suggestion, Ivan grinned. You want me to do something for you? Let me make you a weapon. It seems that if I want to kill Tony Stark, there should be no better choice than you. Speaking of this, Ivan nodded slightly in response to the other party's gaze. So, I am willing to cooperate with you. But first, I have a request. Hearing that the other party agreed to his proposal, Hammer was in a good mood and nodded repeatedly. No problem, no matter what you need, I can satisfy you. I want my little bird. What? Bird? Hearing the other party's request, Hammer was confused. You mean, you need a bird? No problem. Even if it is 10 birds, I can give it to you. Supply? No. What I want is mine. Ivan said with a serious face and firm eyes. Hammer. Okay, I will take care of this. After a moment of silence, Hammer finally agreed. After hearing Hammer's answer, Ivan finally smiled with satisfaction and said nothing more. Then we will have a happy cooperation. A pleasure to work with. The two palms were clasped together, looking at each other and smiling at each other. In the blink of an eye, another week has passed. A week ago, Tony and Chen Luo had just finished competing and returned with another defeat. As soon as Tony got home, he was unhappy and saw Rhodes waiting at home. To be honest, Tony was mentally prepared for Rhodes' arrival. You must know that the reason why he dared to confront Congress head-on was that he was the only one who mastered the arc reactor technology. It was precisely because of this that the military did not dare to break up with him. But now with the emergence of Ivan, his advantage is no longer there, and the military, which has always coveted his steel armor, will naturally be unable to hold it back, and it is very possible to take it by force. Please give me flowers. If it weren't for his good friend Rhodes who was standing in the middle, maybe what he would have waited for today would have been a fully armed army. After understanding this, Tony simply made his choice. Rather than being forced by the other party, it would be better for him to take the initiative to give his friend a set of armor so that he can communicate with the superiors. This way, he can maintain the relationship between them, and secondly, with the development of new elements, he can also ensure that his own armor is more advanced and powerful than the one he handed over, so he won't lose anything with this set of armor. He has understood from the beginning to the end that even if the manufacturing technology of armor is still difficult for the military or hammer industries, sooner or later there will be a breakthrough. After all, Obadiah successfully developed it back then. The new generation of Iron Overlord. Others have no reason to be better than him. Zero, but what is more important than the battle armor is the real core that can drive the normal operation of the battle armor. Arc reactor. This is Tony's core technology that cannot be replicated by others. As long as he has this new energy source, he will be completely invincible. Even now with the emergence of Ivan, his advantage seems to be gone, but this is also based on the fact that others do not know that he has created new elements. With the advent of the latest generation of energy in the future, Tony can guarantee that in the energy field, Stark Group will still be an absolute giant. It is precisely because of this confidence that Tony made such a decision. Then things turned out as he expected. After he chose to give a suit of armor to Rhodes, the military immediately stopped its actions against him, and the relationship between the two parties also eased. But this is only one aspect. Although the military has taken care of it, for Hammer, who has always coveted the status of the Stark Group, dealing with Tony has been his long-cherished wish. Now that he has finally seen hope, how can he let it go easily? Therefore, during this week, in addition to giving Ivan full rights to use his abilities and build weapons, Hammer was also preparing for the subsequent Hammer Industry exhibition. Until 1 week later, that is, tonight, the Hammer Industry exhibition will officially start. Chapter 375, Part 1. Hours before the exhibition begins. Hey, Ivan. In a wide golf course, Hammer picked up the phone in his hand and began to urge. I'm playing golf with Congressman Stanley now. You must have remembered tonight's exhibition, right? Tonight, I want to let the congressman and everyone take a good look at the steel soldiers made by our Hammer Industries. How do they look like? Are there any problems? Iron soldiers aren't ready yet. In a slightly dark studio, Ivan looked at the newly built small reactor in his hand and said calmly, Wait, what do you mean? I can only show, but not demonstrate. What difference does that make? If it's just for display, it can't fly or fire. What did you say? Hammer's face changed and he said anxiously, Then what can you, 630, do with them? This is an arms show. I can make them salute you. Salute? Hammer couldn't control the expression on his face. What the hell is the use of asking them to salute? This is a weapon. We want to show customers their destructive power, not just pick up customers like a welcome guest. Ivan, this is not the condition we agreed upon. You promised me to be a steel armor, and then you promised to be a steel soldier. Man, trust me, everything will go wrong. This is not what I want. However, before Hammer could finish his words, Ivan decisively ended the call. Lowering his head and looking at the long whip that was covered with high-voltage electric current on the table, Ivan's mouth curved slightly, as if he thought of something. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Wait for me, Tony. We will meet again soon. An hour later, an angry Hammer hurried to the headquarters, opened the studio he had prepared for Ivan, and led people in. Ivan. With a bang, he closed the door behind him tightly. Looking at the other party lying leisurely on the recliner, Hammer felt angry and winked behind him. It seems that you are beginning to like this bird now, right? Looking at the parrot standing on Ivan's shoulder, Hammer sneered. Take that stupid bird away from me. Yes. Behind Hammer, a tall and strong man immediately stepped forward, grabbed the parrot on Ivan's shoulder, and then stuffed it into the bag he was carrying. Hey, what are you going to do? Seeing the other party's actions, Ivan's expression changed and he stood up to stop him. But before he could make any move, when he saw that another person behind Hammer had reached for the weapon at his waist, Ivan's eyes flashed coldly, and then he became quiet. How about I took your things away? Are you upset? Good, because now I'm unhappy too. Hammer has long lost the elegance and easygoingness he once had. After tearing off the disguise, he didn't bother to say anything nice to the other party and said directly, "Listen, I don't care what you do. Tonight's exhibition is very important to me. So those steel soldiers, no matter what, you have to find a way to make them move. Do you understand? Although the military came to visit a few days ago, I don't know what means they used to get a set of steel armor from Tony and entrusted their company to modify it and assemble weapons, but it was only one set. For tonight's exhibition, only such a set of armor is undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. Therefore, Ivan's work must be completed as soon as possible to ensure the success of the exhibition. If this exhibition fails, then the large amount of money he has invested in these days will undoubtedly be in vain. For Hammer Industries, which is already under the pressure of the Stark Group and its business is becoming increasingly bleak, such a loss can be described as crippling. Once such a result occurs, it is conceivable that as Hammer's patience runs out, the cooperation between him and Ivan will become in jeopardy. By then, even if he directly chooses to take action against this partner, it's not impossible. Ivan naturally understands this very well. After a long silence, Ivan nodded slowly and Taguchi said, "Give me a little more time. Before the exhibition starts, those steel soldiers will have certain combat abilities." Hearing this, Hammer's gloomy face looked much better. He smiled slightly and said, "That would be great. It's still some time before the exhibition starts. I hope you can finish it within the agreed time. If you can't do it, then our cooperation may not be able to continue. Good luck." After leaving these words, Hammer motioned to the two people behind him to stay and monitor. Then he opened the door alone and walked away. Watching Hammer leave, Ivan's eyes flickered. Without saying anything, he stood up silently and walked toward the workbench. Half an hour before the exhibition starts. On this day, Tony was still in the basement, wearing his newly improved armor for a new round of testing. JRVIS, how much improvement does this suit of armor have in various statistics? Sir, with the new energy, the speed of the armor has increased by 200% compared to the previous generation, and its battery life has increased by 1000%. Its cannon power has increased. Listening to the data reported by JRVIS, Tony nodded slightly. An uncontrollable smile appeared on his face, looking very satisfied. Sounds good. Then let's call this suit of armor Mark 6. Looking at the golden and red steel armor in front of him, with a triangular light shining on the chest, Tony's eyes were full of love, and he stretched out his hand to gently touch the surface of the armor. He didn't know what he thought of and said with some emotion, "It's a pity that although the research and development results of the armor have been achieved, there has not yet been a suitable opportunity for actual combat. I don't know how this armor will perform in actual combat. If I can beat that guy Chen." After saying this, Tony paused and shook his head helplessly. "No. With the power of this armor now, I'm afraid it's not a match for that guy. It seems that the Mark series needs to continue to be developed. No matter what, I have to win against that guy once." Chen Luo couldn't help but appear in his mind. Thinking of his good friend, Tony felt very motivated. "No, it seems that I can't slack off yet, and I will start the research and development of the Mark 7 now. Let me think about it. Yes, it has been designed from the remote control direction. If the Mark 7 has an automatic remote sensing function, the flexibility will also be improved by huge amounts of it." Thinking of this, Tony's face became excited again. He rubbed his palms and immediately planned to continue working. However, before he could start to take action, the next moment, behind him, a rapid ringing sounded. Call from number not shown.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card or directly on my channel.